Empires don't crumble from war. They crumble from the choices kings make in the dark. When no one's watching, when the throne whispers that power matters more than the one person who ever made you human. This is the story of Alpha King Vaelor Draven, a man who ruled an empire with fists of iron, but couldn't save the woman whose bond made him whole. He chose the crown, and she paid the price. If you want to know what happens when an alpha realizes too late that dominance can't fix what love breaks, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to know where my pack is watching from. The northern wind carried ash tonight. Vaelor Draven stood at the edge of the grand hall balcony, his silhouette cutting through the darkness like a blade forged in violence and tempered in regret. Below him, the capital city sprawled, a monument to conquest, discipline, and blood. Torches flickered in perfect rows along the cobblestone streets. Guards patrolled with mechanical precision, their boots echoing against stone in rhythms he'd drilled into them over years of brutal training. Everything moved as he commanded. Everything except the hollow ache in his chest that no amount of power could fill. He pressed his palms against the stone railing, knuckles white from pressure, feeling the rough granite bite into his skin. The empire was flawless on paper, his rule unchallenged by any who valued their lives. Yet tonight, the air tasted wrong, bitter, like smoke from a fire he'd thought long extinguished but had only buried under layers of denial and iron-fisted control. Behind him, the celebration roared with the false enthusiasm of sycophants and political climbers. Diplomats in silk robes that cost more than a common family earned in a year. Generals decorated with medals they'd earned by following his orders without question. Council members drunk on wine imported from the southern vineyards, and drunk on power they wielded in his shadow. They toasted his name, celebrated another year of iron-fisted stability, another year without war bleeding the empire dry, another year of Vaelor Draven proving to the world that kings didn't need mates to be strong. That was the lie he'd built his throne on, brick by blood-soaked brick. His beta, Vaelor Draven, approached from the shadows with the careful footsteps of a man who'd learned over years of service exactly how close he could get before crossing invisible lines. The man moved like a wolf who'd learned to wear a suit, dangerous, contained, loyal to a fault that might one day prove fatal. Vaelor's voice was low when he spoke, careful, measured. He knew the king's moods better than anyone still breathing. Your presence is expected inside, my lord. The Valdrian ambassador wishes to discuss the northern trade routes. He's grown quite insistent. Vaelor didn't turn from his study of the city below. Tell him I'll consider his proposal when he learns to stop lying through his teeth about tariff percentages. I wasn't born yesterday, and I sure as hell wasn't born stupid. Vaelor hesitated. That hesitation spoke volumes in the language of unspoken things that governed their relationship. Vaelor's jaw tightened, his fingers curled harder against the stone. Say it. A pause stretched between them like a chasm. Then, quieter. There are reports from the outer provinces. Sightings. A woman matching. Don't. The word cracked like a whip splitting air. Vaelor's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon where darkness swallowed the world beyond his city's walls, but his shoulders went rigid. His breath came slower. Controlled. The way a man breathes when he's fighting something inside himself that's bigger and meaner than any external enemy. Vaelor didn't flinch. He'd stood beside Vaelor through wars that turned rivers red, coups that ended with bodies hanging from the castle walls, and assassination attempts that left scars they both still carried. He knew when to push, and when pushing might cost him everything. My lord, if it's her, it's not. How can you be certain? Because she's dead. The words fell flat in the cold air. Empty. Hollow. Even Vaelor didn't believe them, and the taste of the lie was acid on his tongue. Vaelor stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper that the wind almost stole. We never found a body. Vaelor's fingers curled into fists that could crush stone. For a moment, just a single heartbeat that felt like eternity, his control slipped like a mask falling away. The alpha in him surged to the surface, raw and violent and utterly uncontained. The air around him thickened, grew oppressive, heavy with dominance that had brought armies to their knees. Vaelor felt it like a physical punch to the gut, like drowning in deep water, but he didn't move. didn't retreat. Then Vaelor exhaled slowly through clenched teeth. The pressure lifted degree by painful degree. The mask slid back into place with practiced ease, born from years of performance. He turned, and his expression was carved from the same stone as the castle walls. Even if the reports are true, it changes nothing. A king cannot afford ghosts haunting his decisions. The Empire demands clarity, not sentiment. It demands strength, not weakness masquerading as loyalty to the past. Kael met his eyes, and for the first time in years, maybe since the beginning, the beta looked almost disappointed, like he'd hoped for something different, something more human. Understood, my lord. Vaelor walked past him with measured steps, back toward the celebration, his footsteps echoing in the cold corridor like a death march. But the ash scent followed him like an accusation, and deep in his bones, in the marrow where instinct lived beyond the reach of logic, something ancient and primal whispered a warning he refused to hear. She's coming. And when she does, everything you've built will burn. Thas. The name no one spoke aloud anymore was Saris Vale. Once, she had been the only softness in Vaelor's brutal world. Not weak. Never weak. That word had never applied to her, not even in the beginning, but steady, grounded. An Omega whose presence didn't demand submission the way his did. It offered something infinitely more dangerous. Balance. Their bond hadn't been a lightning strike that left destruction in its wake. It had been a slow burn, the kind that starts with shared silence in war camps, builds through stolen glances across strategy tables, and solidifies in moments where words aren't needed because breath and heartbeat speak louder than any language. Vaelor had been a warlord then, not yet a king weighed down by a crown that felt heavier every passing year. His father's empire was fracturing along fault lines of corruption and incompetence. Enemies circled like vultures, sensing death on the wind. Allies turned traitor when gold spoke louder than honor. The throne was a death sentence wrapped in gold leaf and ceremony, and everyone knew it. And Saris had walked into his war camp on a rain-soaked morning like she belonged there. He'd never forget that first conversation. She hadn't bowed when his generals stared her down with expressions meant to intimidate. Hadn't flinched when he'd turned the full force of his attention on her, the kind of attention that made grown men stammer. She'd looked him dead in the eye with a steadiness that caught him off guard and said, "You fight like a man who's forgotten what he's protecting." He should have had her thrown out, should have made an example of her insolence. Instead, he'd laughed, a sound so rare his men froze mid-motion, shock painted across their war-hardened faces. "What do you suggest, Omega?" Her answer had been simple, brutal in its honesty, devastating in its accuracy. Remember that power without purpose is just violence wearing a crown, and violence for its own sake burns everything down, including the man wielding it. She'd been right, about everything. Under her influence, Vaelor's strategies shifted like tectonic plates reshaping continents. He stopped burning villages to send messages written in ash and screams, stopped executing prisoners in public squares to prove dominance that needed no proving. He built alliances instead of graveyards, invested in infrastructure instead of fear. And when he finally claimed the throne through a combination of tactical brilliance and calculated mercy, it wasn't through fear alone. It was through the vision she helped him see when he'd been too close to the violence to see anything else. For 3 years, they were inseparable, the Alpha King and his Omega. The Empire whispered about their bond, some in awe at the obvious depth of it, others in envy that curdled into plotting. But no one doubted it, not when you saw them together, not when you felt the way the air changed when they occupied the same space. Until the unraveling began like a thread pulled from a tapestry, slowly at first, then catastrophically. It started small. So small Vaelor almost missed it in the chaos of governing an empire. Saris would forget conversations they'd had hours before, lose track of time, staring at nothing with eyes that saw something he couldn't. Stand in doorways looking confused about which room she'd meant to enter. Vaelor called the best healers money and power could command, brought in scholars who'd spent lifetimes studying Omega physiology, consulted mystics who claimed to read the threads of fate itself. None of them had answers that made sense. None of them could explain why a perfectly healthy Omega was deteriorating before their eyes. Then came the night she shifted without warning, and everything changed. Vaelor had been in a strategy meeting debating troop movements with generals who couldn't agree on basic geography when the scream tore through the castle like reality ripping apart. He'd run, no, sprinted, toward their chambers, his heart pounding in a way no battlefield had ever made it pound, in a way that terrified him more than any weapon pointed at his chest. He found her on the floor of their bedroom, her body caught between human and wolf, in a grotesque cycle that shouldn't have been possible. Bones cracking and reforming with sounds that would haunt his nightmares for years, skin rippling between flesh and fur. Her eyes were wild, unseeing, pupils blown wide with something that looked like terror and rage mixed into pure instinct. She didn't recognize him when he called her name. When he reached for her, she lunged with claws that caught him across the chest. Claws raked through flesh and muscle. Blood sprayed across pale stone floors. Pain exploded white hot. But Vaelor didn't let go. Couldn't let go. He pinned her down using every ounce of alpha dominance he possessed, forcing it through the bond, commanding her wolf into submission with power that felt like wielding a weapon against someone he loved. It worked. Barely. When she finally collapsed, trembling and broken and covered in his blood, he held her, cradled her against his chest despite the wounds still bleeding. But she didn't hold him back. She just stared at the ceiling with empty eyes and whispered in a voice that didn't sound like hers, "I don't know who you are." Those 6 words destroyed him more thoroughly than any enemy ever could. The council had convened the next morning like vultures gathering around a dying animal. 12 men and women who advised the throne. Loyal, competent, ruthless when necessity demanded it. They'd helped Vaelor build this empire from the fractured pieces his father left behind. And now they stood in barely concealed judgment. Chancellor Torvald spoke first because he always spoke first, his privilege earned through decades of service. He was an old wolf, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with a mind like a steel trap. "My lord, we cannot ignore what happened last night. The Omega is unstable. The servants are talking. The guards are nervous. Word will spread." Vaelor's voice was ice over molten fury. "She is my mate, and you are our king." Torvald didn't flinch from the weight of Vaelor's stare. The empire cannot be governed by a ruler distracted by personal tragedy. History proves this again and again. This isn't tragedy. It's illness. It can be cured. We haven't tried everything. The healers disagree. I've spoken with each of them personally. They say, "Then find better healers. Scour the continent if you have to. I don't care what it costs." Silence fell like a hammer. Counselor Mira leaned forward from her seat at the long table. She was younger than most in the room, ambitious in ways that made Vaelor watch her carefully and dangerously intelligent. "My lord, we respect your bond. We understand what she means to you. But the people are watching. If the king's mate is seen as weak, unstable, or... Choose your next words very carefully, Mira." Her jaw tightened, but she continued with the courage of someone who believed she was right. "If she becomes a liability, your enemies will use her against you. They will question your judgment, your strength, your right to rule. You know this. You've exploited the same weakness in others." Vaelor stood slowly. The entire room felt the shift in atmospheric pressure. Alpha dominance rolled off him in waves that made it hard to breathe, suffocating and absolute, like standing in deep water. "I did not build this empire by bending to fear. I will not abandon my mate because a handful of cowards are afraid of what they don't understand." Torvald's expression hardened into something like granite. "Then you risk everything you've built, everything we've built together. So be it. I've gambled on worse odds." The meeting ended with nothing resolved, but the seed was planted in soil that proved far too fertile. 3 months later, Cerys vanished like smoke dispersing in wind. Vaelor had left the castle for a single day. One day to inspect the eastern fortifications where reports suggested structural weaknesses. 24 hours away from her side, the longest separation they'd had in years. When he returned with mud still on his boots, her chambers were empty. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no broken furniture or disturbed belongings, just gone. He'd torn the castle apart stone by stone, interrogated every guard until his voice went hoarse, every servant until they wept from fear, every soul who'd been within 100 yards of her room, used every tool at his disposal, Every technique he'd learned in war. Nothing. Kyle had been the one to find the note, because Kyle always found what others missed. A single piece of parchment on her bedside table, written in her careful hand. It said, "I can't be what you need me to be anymore." 8 words that rewrote his entire world. Vaelor had read it 1,000 times, searching for hidden meaning between the letters, clues in the ink pressure, anything that would make it make sense. But the message was devastatingly clear. She'd left him because she believed she was failing him. The council had offered condolences that rang hollow, promised resources to search for her, but their relief was palpable, hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. And Vaelor had made a choice that would define everything that followed. He buried the bond, locked it away in the deepest part of himself where instinct screamed, focused on the empire with intensity that bordered on obsession. Because kings don't chase ghosts, kings rule, kings endure, kings sacrifice everything personal on the altar of duty. That's what he told himself every night when sleep wouldn't come. That was 4 years ago, and the lie had grown comfortable like broken-in leather. Now, standing in the grand hall, surrounded by false smiles and hollow toasts that celebrated a version of himself he barely recognized, Vaelor felt the weight of that choice like a blade twisting slowly in his gut. He'd convinced himself it was right, necessary. The only way to preserve everything he'd fought for, everything they'd built together before it all fell apart. But the ash scent lingered in his nostrils. And deep in the marrow of his bones, the bond, the thing he'd tried to sever, bury 6 feet under duty and denial, stirred like something waking from hibernation. Not alive, not whole, but screaming. But the celebration dragged on with the momentum of social obligation. Vaelor played his role with practiced precision, shook hands that felt like dead fish, made promises he'd keep because his word was iron, smiled when protocol required it, though the expression never reached his eyes. But his instincts were howling beneath the surface of civilized behavior. Midnight came with bells tolling across the city. The guests began to disperse, filtering out in clusters of political alliance and social hierarchy. Vaelor retreated to his private study as soon as courtesy allowed, a room built from dark wood and colder stone. Maps covered the walls like battle scars. Trade routes marked in red. Military positions in black. Everything a king needed to control an empire through information and force. He poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, didn't taste it when it touched his lips. Kale entered without knocking because he'd earned that right through blood and years. "My lord." Vaelor didn't look up from the map he wasn't really seeing. "Speak." The reports from the provinces. They're not isolated incidents anymore, 7 sightings in the past month alone, all matching the same description. A woman. Alone. Feral when threatened, moving through the borderlands like a ghost. Kyle nodded slowly. The latest came from a hunting party near the Ashwood territories. They claimed she killed a pack of rogue wolves bare-handed. Efficiency, they said, looked almost military. Vaelor's grip tightened on the glass until his knuckles went white. Rogues are common in Ashwood. Territory disputes? Starvation? Madness. Not one slaughtered with that level of precision. The bodies were torn apart, my lord. Clean kills despite the brutality. Efficient, almost tactical. Like someone trained in combat applied those skills without the restraint of civilization. Silence stretched between them like a living thing. Vaelor set the glass down with controlled care. His jaw worked as he ground his teeth. What else? Kale hesitated, and that hesitation carried weight. There was a scent. The hunters couldn't identify it, but they said it felt familiar, like something they should recognize but couldn't place, like a word on the tip of your tongue. Vaelor's breath stopped in his chest. The bond inside him roared to life with violence that nearly brought him to his knees, not gentle, not hopeful, violent, desperate, a thing clawing its way out of a grave he'd dug with duty and sealed with denial. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against stone with a sound like nails on slate. Kale stepped back instinctively, hand moving toward his weapon. My lord? Vaelor's eyes burned gold, the alpha surfacing in ways he usually controlled. Prepare a unit. Small, discreet, best trackers. No one who'll talk. We leave at dawn. Kale's expression shifted. Surprise, concern, something close to relief. You're going after her. I'm going to end this. one way or another. The words were cold, final, spoken like a man heading to an execution, but both men knew the truth that hung unspoken between them. Vaelor wasn't hunting a ghost. He was chasing the only mistake he'd never been able to bury, the only regret that kept him awake when exhaustion should have claimed him. Look, the Ashwood territories were lawless in ways that made frontier towns look civilized. No central authority to appeal to, no kingdom's protection to hide behind, just scattered villages that survived through subsistence and suspicion, bandit camps that preyed on the weak, and forests so dense the sun barely touched the ground even at noon. Vaelor rode at the front of a 6-man unit with shoulders squared and jaw set. Kale beside him, alert and watchful. 4 hand-picked soldiers behind, men he'd fought beside, men who knew when to follow orders and when to ask no questions. No banners proclaiming royal authority, no insignia marking them as anything but travelers, just steel and silence and purpose. They moved through the wilderness like wolves on a hunt because that's what they were. 3 days in, they found the first body sprawled in a clearing. A rogue wolf, male, fully shifted. Throat ripped out so cleanly it looked almost surgical. Claws embedded deep in the dirt like he'd died mid-lunge, frozen in his last moment of aggression. Kale crouched beside the corpse with practiced ease. 2 days old. Maybe 3. Hard to tell in this heat. Vaelor dismounted with movements that had grown stiff from days in the saddle. Studied the scene with eyes that had analyzed 1,000 battlefields. The kill was brutal in execution, but precise in method. Efficient. The kind of violence that came from someone who'd stopped thinking and started surviving on pure instinct. He knelt in the dirt beside the body, pressed his fingers into the earth where blood had soaked in. The scent hit him like a physical blow to the chest, familiar underneath blood and decay and forest rot. Faint but unmistakable to someone who'd known it intimately. Cerys. His hands shook for the first time in years. Kyle noticed because Kyle noticed everything. "My lord?" Vaelor stood on legs that felt unsteady. His voice came out rough, scraped raw. "She was here." They followed the trail for 2 more days through increasingly dense forest. More bodies marking the path like breadcrumbs in a dark fairy tale. More signs of violence that spoke to desperation and skill in equal measure. Each one a story written in blood and claw marks, until the forest opened into a clearing bathed in late afternoon light. And there she was, Cerys Vael, alive, but not whole. She stood in the center of the clearing with her back to them, completely still, except for breathing. Her clothes were torn rags barely holding together with threads. Her hair, once carefully maintained, hung in tangled knots down her back with leaves and twigs woven through it. Her skin was streaked with layers of dirt and dried blood, some old, some fresh. But it was her stance that broke something fundamental in Vaelor's chest. Hunched, guarded, weight balanced on the balls of her feet, like an animal that had forgotten how to be human and didn't care to remember. Vaelor dismounted with movements so slow they felt like moving through water. Every instinct screamed at him to run to her, to touch her, to pull her back from whatever edge she was teetering on. But he forced himself to move carefully because sudden movement spooked wild things. Cerys. His voice cracked on her name like ice breaking. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the sound. Vaelor took another step, leaves crunching under his boots. "Cerys, it's me. It's Vaelor." Her shoulders tensed like a bowstring drawn tight. Her breathing quickened, audible even across the distance. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, she turned. And Vaelor's world shattered into pieces he'd never be able to reassemble. Her eyes, those steady, warm eyes that had once looked at him like he was worth saving, like he was more than violence and conquest, were hollow, wild, flickering between recognition and something far darker, far more primal. She stared at him for seconds that felt like hours, tilted her head in a motion that was more animal than human, studying him like prey or threat, or both. Then her lips moved. Her voice came out hoarse, broken, unused. "I know you." Vaelor's chest tightened until breathing hurt. "Yes, you do. It's me. It's Vaelor." A pause that stretched like eternity. Then quieter, each word deliberate. "You left me." The accusation hit harder than any blade ever had. Vaelor stepped forward with hands raised, palms open, non-threatening. "No. Cerys, you left. You wrote the note. You—" Her eyes flashed gold like lightning in a storm. A growl rumbled low in her chest, vibrating the air. "You left me in the dark when I needed you." Behind him, Kale's hand moved to his sword hilt with trained reflex. The soldiers tensed, reading the danger in every line of her body. But Vaelor didn't move towards safety. He met her gaze. Unflinching. Accepting. "I did. And I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." Cerys's expression twisted through emotions too fast to track. Confusion, pain, rage that burned like wildfire. Then she shifted. Not fully, not cleanly the way it should happen. Her bones cracked with sounds that made grown soldiers flinch. Her body convulsed, muscles spasming, claws sprouted from fingernails. Fur rippled across skin in patches, but her face stayed human. And in that horrifying in-between state that shouldn't exist, she screamed. Not in pain, though pain was clearly there. In fury that shook leaves from trees. She lunged across the clearing with speed that defied tracking. Vaelor didn't fight back. Didn't dodge. Didn't raise his hands to defend. He caught her mid-leap, arms wrapping around her convulsing form like he was trying to hold water. Claws tore into his shoulders, shredding leather and flesh. Blood poured hot down his back. Pain exploded through nerve endings. But he held on with grip that wouldn't break. "Cerys," he whispered against her ear, voice breaking around her name. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. Not again. Never again." She thrashed in his arms like a wild thing caught in a trap. Snarled with teeth that were changing shape. Fought with every ounce of feral strength that came from years of pure survival. But Vaelor didn't let go even when consciousness threatened to slip. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, like dawn breaking, her body stopped fighting quite so hard. The shift reversed in stuttering waves. Bones snapped back into human configuration with wet sounds. Fur receded into skin, claws retracted. She collapsed against him, shaking violently, sobbing with sounds that came from somewhere deep and broken, her full weight supported only by his arms. And for the first time in 4 years, Vaelor let himself feel the full crushing weight of what he'd done. He'd chosen power over her when the choice had mattered most, and she'd paid the price in ways that would leave scars nothing could heal. Kale approached with caution that bordered on fear. "My lord, we need to move. If she shifts again—" "She won't." Vaelor's voice was absolute despite the blood soaking his clothes. He cradled Cerys like she was made of glass and gold, precious and fragile. But even as he said it with conviction, he felt her trembling in his arms, felt the instability rolling off her in waves, felt the barely contained chaos just beneath her skin. This wasn't over. This wasn't even close to over. This was just the beginning of whatever came next. Because as Vaelor lifted her into his arms, with muscles screaming protest and turned back toward the horses, he saw something that made his blood run cold despite the pain. In the tree line, watching with eyes that caught fading light, figures, multiple, cloaked in dark fabric that blended with shadows, armed with crossbows and blades that meant business, and at the front, face visible beneath a hood, a face he recognized. Counselor Mira. Her expression was cold, calculating. The look of someone doing unpleasant but necessary work. And in her hands, she held a crossbow with steady aim, aimed directly at Cerys's heart. Vaelor's eyes blazed gold bright enough to see in dimming light. "Stand. Down." His voice carried alpha command that should have brought her to her knees. Mira didn't lower the weapon, didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, my lord. Truly. But the council has made its decision. This ends now, for the good of the Empire." The forest erupted into chaos and violence. Crossbow bolts whistled through twilight air like death singing. Vaelor moved on pure instinct, twisting his body to shield Cerys as the first volley cut through space where her head had been a heartbeat before. Steel-tipped death embedded in tree bark behind him with thuds that sounded too soft for what they represented. Kael was already moving, sword clearing its sheath with a ring of metal that meant business. The 4 soldiers scattered into defensive positions with discipline, drilled into muscle memory, shields raised, weapons drawn. But there were too many in the tree line, a dozen at least, maybe more hiding in shadows that grew longer by the second. Mira's voice cut through chaos with the calm of someone who'd already accepted what came next. "My lord, set her down. This doesn't have to end with your blood on my hands too." Vaelor's laugh was sharp, humorless, edged with violence barely contained. "You think I'll just hand her over?" "You don't know me at all, counselor. I know you built an empire on logic, not emotion. I know you made the hard choice once before. You can make it again. That's where you're wrong." Vaelor's eyes blazed gold in fading light, alpha dominance rolling off him in waves that made the air heavy. Cerys stirred in his arms, her breathing erratic, on the edge of shifting again. He could feel her instability like a living thing, could feel how close she was to losing herself completely. Kael moved to his side, blade ready, voice low and urgent. "My lord, we're outnumbered. If we fight here, then we fight here. They'll kill her anyway. We need to retreat, regroup. No. No more retreating. No more choosing the smart play over what's right." Something in Vaelor's voice made even Kael pause. This wasn't the calculating king who'd won wars through strategy. This was something rawer, more dangerous. This was a man who'd lost everything once and refused to lose it again. Mira gestured, and the figures in the tree line advanced with coordinated precision that spoke to training and purpose. Not bandits, not rogues, professional soldiers following orders, the council's personal guard, men loyal to the institution, not the man wearing the crown. Vaelor recognized some of their faces, had promoted some of them himself. That recognition burned like acid. "You're all willing to die for this? For their paranoia?" "Not paranoia, my lord." One of the soldiers spoke up, voice carrying across the clearing. "Survival. The Empire's survival. A king compromised by an unstable mate is a king who can be exploited. History proves this. History is written by whoever survives to hold the pen." Vaelor shifted his grip on Cerys, moving her weight to one arm despite the screaming protest of muscles torn by her claws. Blood still seeped hot down his back, soaking fabric, making his grip slippery. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to lower your weapons. You're going to walk away. And you're going to tell the council that if they want her dead, they'll have to go through me. We have our orders, my lord. Then follow them. But understand this." Vaelor's voice dropped to something colder than winter, harder than steel. "I will kill every single one of you. And when I return to the capital, I will hang what's left of the council from the castle walls. Their families will watch. The Empire will watch. And everyone will understand what happens when you threaten what's mine." The words hung in air thick with threat and promise. Understanding this is what makes the difference between being a ruler who's respected and one who's merely obeyed. Fear's a tool, sure. Vaelor had used it plenty, had built whole sections of his empire on the foundation of people being too scared to cross him. But there's a difference between strategic fear, the kind that keeps borders secure and traitors in line, and the visceral terror of a man who's lost his ability to calculate cost versus benefit. Right now, Vaelor had stopped calculating. That made him infinitely more dangerous than any version of himself that sat on a throne making measured decisions. Mira's expression flickered, uncertainty creeping in around the edges of conviction. She'd expected the king who chose empire over mate, the man who'd let Cerys walk away because duty demanded it. She hadn't accounted for what 4 years of regret could do to a man's priorities. "My lord, please, be reasonable. Think about..." Reasonable died when you pointed a weapon at her. The standoff stretched like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Then Cerys moved in his arms. Not violently, not attacking, just awareness returning in fragments. Her eyes opened, still more gold than their natural color, but focused. Seeing. She looked at Vaelor's face inches from hers, at the blood soaking his shoulder, at the protective way he held her despite the obvious pain. Her voice came out rough, confused, achingly fragile. Why? That single word carried weight that broke something in Vaelor's chest. Because I was wrong. Because I should have fought for you then. Because I'm fighting now. Her eyes searched his face like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. They want me dead. I know, you should let them. Never. Why? Because some mistakes don't get second chances, and I'm not wasting mine. The simplicity of it seemed to reach her in ways logic couldn't. Something shifted in her expression. Not full recognition, not the woman she'd been before everything broke, but present. Here. Making a choice. She pushed against his chest, not fighting, asking to stand. Vaelor hesitated, then slowly set her feet on the ground, keeping one arm around her waist for support. She swayed, legs unsteady from God knows how long living wild, but she didn't fall. She turned to face the soldiers with Vaelor at her back. And despite everything, the torn clothes, the matted hair, the wild eyes, she carried herself with an echo of the woman who'd once walked into a war camp and told a warlord he'd forgotten his purpose. "You want to kill me?" Her voice was hoarse but clear, direct. Mira's crossbow didn't waver. "We want to protect the Empire." By murdering an Omega who never asked for any of this? Cerys laughed, and the sound was broken glass. By killing someone whose only crime was getting sick? You're a liability. The king already proved he can't make rational decisions where you're concerned. Then kill me. But do it honestly. Don't hide behind duty and empire and protection. Admit you're executing someone because she's inconvenient. The words landed like physical blows. One of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Another lowered his crossbow slightly before catching himself. Cerys took a step forward, and Vaelor moved with her, hand on her waist, ready to pull her back or shield her or burn the whole forest down if necessary. I don't remember everything. Most days I don't remember being human. But I remember enough to know that empires built on this kind of fear don't last. They eat themselves from the inside. She gestured at the soldiers with a hand that still had dirt under the nails. You think you're protecting something, but you're destroying the thing that made it worth protecting in the first place. The idea that strength means taking care of what's broken, not executing it. Mira's jaw clenched, her finger tightened on the trigger. Pretty words don't change reality, no, but they reveal it. Vaelor felt the shift in the clearing before anyone else, felt the way attention pivoted, the way doubt crept in like smoke. This is the thing about power that nobody teaches you when you're clawing your way to the top. Real power isn't in the throne or the crown or the ability to give orders. It's in the moment when people choose to follow you even when obedience isn't enforced. When they decide your vision is worth the cost. Vaelor had built an empire on calculated dominance, but Cerys, even broken, even barely holding herself together, was showing him what he'd lost when he stopped believing in anything beyond strategy. The ability to inspire instead of just command. Kael stepped forward, sword still drawn, but posture shifting. "Counselor Mira, stand down." The beta's voice carried authority earned through years at Vaelor's side. Mira's eyes snapped to him. "You too, Kael. You'd betray the council's orders? I'd honor the oath I swore, to protect the king and the empire. And right now, this..." He gestured at the armed soldiers, the crossbows, the whole situation. "This is the bigger threat." Two of the soldiers lowered their weapons fully, then a third. The coordinated precision was fracturing into individual choices. Mira saw it happening, saw control slipping like sand through fingers. Her face went hard. So be it. She fired. Vaelor moved faster than thought, pulling Cerys aside as the bolt carved through air where her chest had been. But Mira was already loading another, and the soldiers who still followed her orders raised weapons. Then Cerys shifted, not into the broken, painful transformation from before. This was different, faster, more controlled, like muscle memory kicking in from before the sickness took her. Her wolf was massive, gray fur with silver highlights, eyes still gold but focused now, purposeful. She hit the first soldier before anyone could react, taking him down with precision that didn't kill but absolutely incapacitated. Then the second, moving like violence choreographed to music nobody else could hear. Vaelor and Kael moved in tandem, years of fighting together making them a single unit. Steel met steel, bodies hit ground, blood sprayed across leaves. The fight was brutal and short. When it ended, 5 soldiers were down. Not dead, Vaelor had been specific about that, even in the chaos, but thoroughly out of commission. Mira stood alone, crossbow empty, surrounded by people she'd badly miscalculated. Cerys padded toward her in wolf form, each step deliberate. Mira backed against a tree, hand fumbling for a blade at her hip. Cerys shifted back to human right in front of her, The transformation was smoother this time, more natural, though still obviously painful. She stood naked and covered in blood that wasn't hers, breathing hard, eyes locked on Mira's face. "You were going to kill me to protect the Empire." Mira lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes. Then you should understand why I'm not going to kill you." Confusion flickered across Mira's features. Sarah stepped closer until they were inches apart. "Because mercy is stronger than fear, always has been. And if you want to protect something, you protect all of it, not just the parts that are convenient." She turned away, dismissing Mira like she was nothing. Vaelor moved to her side, stripping off his cloak to wrap around her shoulders despite his own wounds. His hands shook slightly as he fastened it, adrenaline crash starting to hit. Saris looked up at him, and for the first time since the clearing, her eyes were clear, fully present. "You came for me. I never should have stopped looking. I left you. You were sick. You thought you were protecting me by leaving. I know that now." A pause. Then, quieter. "I don't know if I can be fixed."
"I don't care. You should. The king needs... I need you. The Empire can adjust." The words hung between them like a bridge being built from wreckage. Kael approached with characteristic timing, giving them space but not much. "My lord, we need to move. More may be coming, and the wounded need treatment." Vaelor nodded without taking his eyes off Saris. "Bind the prisoners. We take everyone back to the capital." "All of them?" Kael's eyebrows rose.
"All of them. Let the council see what their orders cost." Oishi. The journey back took 3 days of hard riding. Saris rode with Vaelor, her body pressed against his back, arms around his waist. She didn't speak much. Sometimes she'd tense like she was about to shift. Other times she'd go completely still, barely breathing. But she didn't run. They camped rough, taking turns on watch. The captured soldiers stayed bound but were treated fairly. Mira maintained stony silence, refusing food, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. On the second night, Saris finally spoke more than a few words. They were sitting by the fire, Vaelor cleaning his wounds with water that stung like hell. Saris watched with an intensity that made him nervous. "I remember pieces. Not everything, not in order. You don't have to." "I need to." She cut him off gently but firmly. "I need to say this while I can." He stilled, giving her space to find words. "I remember leaving, remember thinking I was becoming a monster, that you'd be better off without me pulling you down. Remember writing that note and crying because I knew it would hurt you, but not as much as watching me deteriorate." Vaelor's throat tightened. "I remember the first few weeks, trying to stay in control, failing. The shifts got worse, longer, until I couldn't tell where the wolf ended and I began." Her hands twisted in the fabric of the cloak. "I killed people. Not many. Not on purpose. But when they cornered me, when they tried to capture me, I don't remember making the choice. Just remember the after. The blood. You survived. That's all that matters." "Is it?" She looked at him finally. "Is survival enough when you've lost who you are?" This is where philosophy meets reality in ways that break hearts. People talk about survival like it's the goal, like making it through is enough. But Vaelor was learning, too late, always too goddamn late, that survival without self is just breathing, just heart beating. The person you were gets buried under instinct and necessity, and what crawls out the other side might wear your face but doesn't recognize your reflection. That's what they'd both lost. Not just each other, but the versions of themselves that had existed together. You're still you. Changed, but still you. How do you know? Because you chose not to kill Mira, because you shifted to protect instead of just attack, because you're sitting here talking to me instead of running. Saris was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I can go back to the capital, all those people, all that noise, all those expectations. Then we'll figure something else out. You can't just abandon the throne. Watch me." "Vaelor, I mean it. I spent 4 years choosing the crown over everything else. And what did it get me? An empire? Sure, respect? Absolutely. But every night I went to bed alone in a castle full of people, I felt more empty than I did in war camps surrounded by enemies." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand. "I made my choice then. I'm making a different one now. The council won't accept it. Then we change the council. You can't just..." "Yes, I can." I'm the king, and it's about time I remember that the crown serves me, not the other way around. Her fingers tightened on his. I'm scared. Me too. The admission seemed to surprise them both. They reached the capital on the fourth day, riding through gates that opened at the sight of the king, but closed with nervous finality once the group passed through. Word had already spread. Somehow, it always did. The king had gone to the borderlands. The king had found the lost Omega. The king had fought his own council's guards. The castle was a storm of whispered speculation and barely concealed panic. Vaelor rode straight to the council chambers with Cerys beside him and the captured soldiers trailing behind. Kael had sent a runner ahead. The council would be assembled. They were going to have a conversation, the kind that redefined power structures. Torvald stood at the head of the table when Vaelor entered. The old wolf's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes tracked every movement. My lord, we heard you encountered difficulties. Difficulties? Vaelor's voice was flat. That's what we're calling assassination attempts now. The council authorized protective measures. The council authorized murder. Vaelor stepped further into the room, Cerys at his side. She was cleaned up now, wearing clothes that fit, hair brushed, but the wildness still showed in her eyes. Still showed in how she moved, weight on the balls of her feet, ready to run or fight. The other council members shifted uncomfortably. Torvald's expression hardened. My lord, you're emotionally compromised. Perhaps we should discuss this after you've had time to... No, we discuss this now. All of it. On the table. Vaelor pulled out a chair, gestured for Cerys to sit. She hesitated, then did, perched on the edge like she might bolt any second. He remained standing. 4 years ago, I made a choice. I let the woman I loved disappear because I believed the Empire was more important. Because all of you convinced me that personal attachments were weaknesses, that a king couldn't afford to be distracted by matters of the heart. He looked around the table, meeting each set of eyes. I was wrong. And you were wrong. And we're going to fix it. My lord, I'm not finished. The alpha dominance in those 3 words shut down every attempt at interruption. The Empire is strong. Our borders are secure. Our people are fed. Our enemies are contained. All of that is true. But we built it on a foundation that requires people to sacrifice their humanity for duty, and I'm here to tell you that's not sustainable. Counselor Mira spoke from her position near the end of the table. She'd been brought in under guard, still facing charges. Sentiment doesn't hold empires together. Structure does. Law does. The willingness to make hard choices does. You're right, Vaelor nodded. Hard choices do matter. But so does knowing which choices are hard because they're necessary, and which are hard because we've forgotten why we're making them in the first place. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. Cerys is sick. Not weak. Not a liability. Sick. And instead of finding ways to help her, you decided execution was cleaner, simpler, better for the Empire's image. We tried helping her, my lord. Torvald's voice carried weight. Every healer in the kingdom examined her. No one could find a cure. Because you stopped looking when it became inconvenient. Because you wrote her off the moment she became more problem than solution. There was truth in that, and everyone in the room knew it. Here's what's going to happen now. Vaelor straightened, and his voice carried the absolute authority of someone who'd stopped negotiating. First, we're going to find the best healers, scholars, and researchers in every kingdom we have contact with. We're going to offer them whatever they need to study what's happening to Omegas who experience this kind of deterioration. Not just for Cerys. For anyone it might help. Second, we're going to restructure how the council operates. No more unilateral decisions about threats to the throne. No more authorizing assassinations without my explicit knowledge and approval. Third, Counselor Mira and anyone else involved in the attempt on Cerys' life will face trial. Public trial. The Empire will see that even the council is not above the law. The room erupted in objections, arguments, protests about precedent and tradition, and the dangers of showing weakness. Vaelor let them yell, let them vent, let them realize their words were hitting stone. When the noise died down, he spoke quietly. More dangerous in softness than volume. I built this empire. I bled for it. I sacrificed for it. And I'm telling you now, it bends or it breaks. Your choice. Torvald studied him for a long moment. The old wolf had seen many kings, had advised Vaelor's father, had survived more political storms than most people lived through. Finally, he spoke. "And if we refuse? Then you leave this room and don't come back. I'll build a new council, one that understands that strength and compassion aren't mutually exclusive." The silence that followed was absolute. This is the moment that defines everything. Not battles, not conquests, not even the bond between an alpha and his omega. This is when a man decides whether the power he's accumulated will control him or whether he'll control it. Whether the throne is a prison built from other people's expectations or a tool to reshape the world into something better. Vaelor had spent 4 years being controlled. By duty, by tradition, by the voices of 12 people who meant well but couldn't see past their own fear. He was done being controlled. One by one, council members looked away, yielding, accepting, all except Mira, whose face remained defiant even in defeat. Torvald nodded slowly. "Very well, my lord. We'll proceed as you've outlined." "Good." Vaelor straightened. "Council is dismissed. We reconvene tomorrow to begin implementation." They filed out in silence, leaving only Vaelor, Cerys, and Kael in the vast chamber. Cerys stood slowly from the chair. "You just restructured your entire government for me. I restructured it because it needed restructuring. You just gave me the push to finally do it." She moved closer to him, and he could see the weight of everything crashing down on her. The exhaustion, the fear, the fragile hope. "I don't know how to be what I was before." "Then be what you are now. We'll figure out the rest." "What if I shift again? What if I hurt someone?" "Then we deal with it, together." The word seemed to break something in her. She collapsed against his chest, and he caught her, wrapping arms around her despite the screaming protest of wounds not fully healed. She sobbed into his shoulder. Not delicate tears, gut-wrenching sounds that came from years of holding herself together alone in the wilderness. Vaelor held her and let her break because that's what you do when you love someone. You hold the pieces until they're ready to put themselves back together. Kael cleared his throat softly from near the door. "I'll post guards outside your chambers. Discreet, in case of complications." "Thank you." The beta nodded and slipped out, closing the door behind him. Vaelor guided Cerys toward the private quarters attached to the council chambers. She moved mechanically, exhaustion overriding everything else. He got her to the bed, helped her lie down, started to pull away to give her space. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't leave. I'm just going to... Please." He stopped, looked at her face, saw the terror underneath the exhaustion. "I'm not going anywhere." He lay down beside her, fully clothed, on top of the covers. She curled against him like she was afraid he'd disappear if she didn't maintain contact. Minutes passed. Her breathing evened out, sleep taking her under. But before she went completely, she whispered something that carved itself into his bones. "I'm broken, Vaelor." His arms tightened around her. "Then we're both broken. And maybe that's what we need to be." The trial of Counselor Mira and the soldiers who'd followed her orders took 3 weeks to prepare. In that time, Cerys stayed in the castle, mostly in Vaelor's chambers. She had good days and bad days. Days where she was almost herself, and days where the wolf was so close to the surface that speaking was a struggle. Vaelor brought in healers who approached her condition with curiosity instead of fear. Scholars who documented symptoms without judgment. One particularly brilliant researcher suggested it might be neurological, something in the way omega physiology processed certain stresses. They were years away from understanding, let alone curing. But they were trying. That was the difference. The trial itself was held in the Grand Hall with half the city in attendance. Public, transparent, exactly what Vaelor had promised. Mira defended her actions without apology. She'd believed she was protecting the Empire, believed the king was compromised, believed execution was the kindest option for everyone involved. The prosecution tore her reasoning apart with brutal efficiency. The verdict was exile, stripped of rank and position, sent to the frontier territories to live out her days far from power. Harsh, but not execution. Mercy wrapped in consequences. The soldiers who'd followed her orders received lighter sentences. Demotions, reassignments. Most accepted them with visible relief that it wasn't worse. When it was over, Vaelor stood before the assembled crowd. This empire was built on strength, on discipline, on the willingness to make hard choices. Those foundations remain. But we're adding something new. The understanding that strength includes compassion, that discipline includes flexibility, that hard choices should be made with wisdom, not fear. He looked at Ceres standing at the edge of the hall, Kael beside her for support. We will not execute people for being inconvenient. We will not hide our weaknesses. We will face them, study them, and overcome them. Together. The crowd didn't cheer, not exactly, but something shifted in the collective consciousness. A new narrative taking root. Heat. 3 months after the trial, Ceres had her first fully controlled shift in years. It happened in the private courtyard gardens, with only Vaelor present. She'd been practicing, working with instinct instead of fighting it, learning to ride the transition instead of being torn apart by it. When she shifted back to human, she was crying and laughing at the same time. I did it. I actually did it. Vaelor pulled her into his arms, not caring about nudity or propriety or anything except the fact that she was here and whole and herself. I never doubted you, liar. He laughed against her hair. Okay, maybe I doubted a little, but I never stopped believing it was possible. She pulled back to look at his face. I'm not healed, not completely. I may never be what I was. I don't need what you were. I need who you are. And who is that? The woman who told a warlord he'd forgotten his purpose. The woman who survived 4 years alone in the wilderness. The woman who chose mercy when revenge would have been easier. He cupped her face in his hands. You're stronger than me, Ceres. You always were. She kissed him then, soft at first, then deeper, years of separation and pain and hope pouring into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. What now? Now we figure out how to rebuild. Not just us. Everything. That's a big task. Good thing we've got time. 6 months after Vaelor returned from the borderlands with Ceres, the Empire looked different in subtle but important ways. The Council was restructured with new members who brought diverse perspectives. Healers and scholars were elevated to advisory positions. Programs were established to study and support Omegas experiencing the kind of deterioration Ceres had suffered. Not all changes were popular. Not all were successful. But they were trying, and that mattered more than anyone had realized. Ceres never fully recovered. She still had episodes where control slipped, still had days where the wolf was stronger than the woman, but she learned to manage it, learned to feel the shifts coming and remove herself before anyone got hurt. And slowly, painfully, she learned to trust again. Trust Vaelor when he said he wasn't leaving. Trust the healers when they said they were helping, not experimenting. Trust herself when Wolf rose up and she had to decide whether to fight it or ride it. Vaelor learned too. Learned that being king didn't mean having all the answers. Learned that showing vulnerability didn't make him weak. Learned that the Empire was stronger when it cared for all its people, not just the convenient ones. They didn't get a fairy tale ending. They got something messier, more real. They got each other, broken pieces and all, and they got the chance to build something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. 1 year to the day after the confrontation in the clearing, Vaelor and Ceres stood on the same balcony where he'd first heard the reports of her survival. The city spread below them, alive and thriving, imperfect but functional, growing in ways that surprised them both. Ceres leaned against the railing, her hand finding his. Do you ever regret it? Choosing this instead of the cleaner path? Every single day. She looked at him sharply. He smiled, the expression genuine. But I'd regret the alternative more. I'd regret losing you again. I'd regret building an empire I couldn't live with. I'd regret dying alone in a castle, surrounded by people who feared me but never knew me. He squeezed her hand. This is harder. This is messier. But it's real. And real is worth the cost. Even when I shift without warning and destroy furniture? Even then. Even when the council argues about resources for programs they think are wasteful? Even then. Even when you wake up in the middle of the night because I'm standing in the corner growling at shadows? He turned to face her fully, both hands cradling her face. Especially then. Because those moments remind me that you're still fighting, still here, still choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. Tears gathered in her eyes. I love you, Vaelor Draven. Broken and complicated and inconvenient as that is, I love you too. And inconvenient is just another word for worth the effort. They stood together as night fell over the empire, two broken people holding each other up, proving that strength doesn't come from perfection. It comes from refusing to quit when everything falls apart. It comes from choosing love when power would be simpler. It comes from building something new when the old foundations crack. Behind them, through the open balcony doors, voices drifted from the council chambers. Arguments about policy and resources and the thousand small decisions that kept an empire running. But out here, in the cold night air, there was just breath and heartbeat and the quiet certainty that they'd made the right choice. The hard choice. The one that bled, but the only one they could live with. And somewhere in the wilderness beyond the city walls, other Omegas who'd thought themselves monsters heard whispers of the king who'd restructured an empire for his broken mate, heard about programs offering help instead of execution, heard about sanctuaries instead of hunting parties, and one by one, they started to emerge from shadows, started to hope that maybe, just maybe, survival wasn't all they deserved, that maybe broken didn't mean worthless, that maybe they could come home. The empire was changing, not through conquest or decree, but through one impossible choice that proved mercy could be stronger than fear. And every night, when the Alpha King sat beside his Omega, the woman who'd once been lost and was now found, still fractured but fighting, he understood something no throne had ever taught him. Power means nothing if you can't use it to protect what you love. Dominance is empty if it can't make space for weakness. And empires are only worth ruling if the cost doesn't destroy the man holding the crown. He'd paid that cost once. He wouldn't pay it again. Not for all the kingdoms in the world. The first sign that everything was about to collapse came on a Tuesday morning when Kael didn't show up for the dawn briefing. Vaelor stood in the war room with maps spread across the table, reports from the northern provinces stacked in neat piles, and an empty chair where his beta should have been sitting. Kael was never late. Not in 15 years of service. Not through wars, coups, or assassination attempts. The absence felt like a tooth missing. Wrong, in a way that made instinct scream warnings Vaelor's conscious mind wasn't ready to process. He sent a runner to Kael's quarters. The man returned pale-faced and stammering. "My lord, the beta's chambers are empty. Looks like he left in a hurry." Bed not slept in. Vaelor's jaw tightened. He dismissed the runner with a gesture and stared at the maps without seeing them. Saris entered the war room with breakfast neither of them would eat, took one look at his face, and set the tray down carefully. What's wrong? Kael's missing. Missing how? Gone. No word, no explanation, just gone. She moved to his side, her presence grounding in ways he'd learned to rely on over the past year. Her hand found his arm. Could he be on an errand you forgot about? No. We had plans to review the new council proposals this morning. He knew it was important. The thing about betrayal is it never announces itself with trumpets and declarations. It creeps in through the gaps in your trust, through the blind spots created by years of loyalty. You don't see it coming because you've trained yourself not to look for it in the faces of people who've bled beside you. Vaelor had built an empire on reading threats, on anticipating attacks before they materialized, but he'd also built it on trusting the handful of people who'd proven themselves in fire and blood. Kael was one of those people, which meant this absence was either nothing, a misunderstanding, an emergency that pulled him away, or it was everything. 2 hours later, a messenger arrived from the eastern garrison with a sealed letter addressed to the king in Kael's handwriting. Vaelor broke the seal with fingers that didn't shake because kings don't shake. The words inside were efficient. Military. Exactly like Kael. My lord, by the time you read this, I'll be beyond your reach. What I'm about to tell you will sound like madness or treason or both. I need you to understand it's neither. It's necessity. Saris's condition isn't natural. It never was. The deterioration, the uncontrolled shifts, the loss of self. It was engineered. A poison created specifically to destabilize powerful omegas bonded to alphas in positions of authority. I know this because I administered it. Vaelor's vision tunneled. The words on the page blurred, refocused, burned themselves into his retinas. 3 years ago, elements within the old council approached me with concerns about your mate bond affecting your judgment. They feared you were becoming too soft, too willing to compromise, too influenced by an Omega's perspective on governance. They wanted her removed but couldn't risk the political fallout of outright assassination. So they found another way. A slow poison that mimics degenerative neurological conditions in Omegas. Undetectable by conventional healers. Progressive. Irreversible once it reaches a certain threshold. I was the one who put it in her evening tea, every night for 6 months, small doses, enough to build up in her system without raising immediate suspicion. By the time you noticed the symptoms, I'd already stopped. The damage was done. And when she left, when she disappeared into the wilderness, I convinced myself it was for the best, that the Empire needed a king uncomplicated by personal attachments. I was wrong about everything. Watching you this past year, watching what you've built from the wreckage of that choice, I understand now what we destroyed. Not just your mate, not just your bond, but the very thing that made your rule different from every tyrant who came before. I can't undo what I did. The poison has no antidote that I'm aware of, but I can give you the names of everyone involved and evidence of their conspiracy. It won't bring back what Cerys lost. It won't erase my betrayal. But maybe it'll help you burn out the rot before it spreads further. The old council members who commissioned this, Chancellor Torvald, Councillor Heron, Advisor Vex, all still in positions of influence, all still believing they acted in the Empire's best interest. I'm leaving because I can't face what I've done. Because seeing you trust me every day while knowing what I took from you has broken something in me that can't be fixed. Do what you will with this information. Execute me if we ever meet again. I'll deserve it. The letter was signed simply, Kael. Vaelor read it twice, then a third time, his hand steady through sheer force of will. Cerys' voice came from very far away. Vaelor? What does it say? He handed her the letter without speaking, watched her face as she read, watched recognition dawn, then horror, then a rage so pure it made the air shimmer. She crumpled the letter in her fist. He poisoned me. Her voice was flat, dead, the kind of tone that came before violence or complete shutdown. Vaelor still couldn't speak. The betrayal was too massive, too complete. Kael had been there from the beginning, had helped him win the throne, had stood beside him through every decision, every crisis, every moment of doubt. And the entire time, he'd been the architect of the single worst thing that had ever happened to them. Cerys threw the wadded letter across the room. All of it. Everything I went through. The confusion. The terror. The months in the wilderness barely remembering my own name. The people I killed when I couldn't control the shifts. All of it was manufactured. She turned to Vaelor, and her eyes were blazing gold. They took my mind apart piece by piece and convinced everyone it was natural, convinced you there was nothing to be done. And you believed them. I didn't know you should have. Her voice cracked. You're supposed to be the smartest, most calculating bastard in the Empire, and you didn't see it. Didn't question why a healthy Omega suddenly deteriorated for no reason. Because I trusted the people around me. Because I thought, you thought wrong. We both did. The air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with fury that needed a target. Here's the thing about betrayal at this level. It doesn't just break trust. It shatters your entire understanding of reality. Every memory gets re-examined. Every conversation recontextualized. You start questioning everything because if this person could lie about this thing, what else was a lie? How much of your life was built on foundations that never existed? Vaelor felt his world tilting, felt certainty crumbling like sandcastles against tide. Cerys paced the room like a caged animal, her movements jerky, barely controlled. Torvald. He's still on the council, still advising you, still pretending to care about the Empire while he orchestrates the destruction of anyone he sees as a threat. I'll handle it. Handle it? She spun to face him. Handle it how? With a trial? With exile? They poisoned me for months, Vaelor. They stole years of my life. They made me into a monster and then tried to have me executed for becoming what they created. I know. You don't know. You got to be the hero who came to save me. You got redemption, but I'm the one who lived through it. Who still lives through it every day when the shifts come, and I have to fight not to lose myself completely. Her chest heaved. Tears streaked her face, but her expression was pure rage. There is no handling this. There's only revenge or surrender. And I'm done surrendering. She shifted then, not fully but enough. Bones cracking, claws emerging, the warning signs of someone about to lose control. Vaelor moved on instinct, crossing the space between them, hands on her shoulders. Cerys, stay with me. Don't let them take this too. Her eyes flickered between gold and human, fighting the pull. They took everything else. Then don't give them this. Don't give them the satisfaction of proving them right, that you're too unstable, too dangerous, too broken to be trusted. The words were harsh, calculated. Exactly what she needed to hear to shock her back. She shuddered violently, and the partial shift reversed. She sagged against him, breathing hard, shaking with the effort of maintaining control. I hate that you're right. I hate it too. They stood there, holding each other in the wreckage of trust, and Vaelor made a decision, the kind that would define what came next. The emergency council session was called for that evening. Mandatory attendance. No exceptions. Vaelor sat at the head of the table with Cerys beside him, the first time she'd attended a council meeting. Her presence alone sent ripples of surprise through the gathered members. Torvald's expression was carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. Assessment. Vaelor let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then he dropped Kael's letter on the table. Read it. The letter made its way around the table. Vaelor watched faces carefully, watched who showed genuine surprise and who showed concern about being implicated. Torvald read it with the expression of a man examining reports of distant battles. When he finished, he set it down gently. My lord, if these accusations are true, they are. Then Kael has committed treason of the highest order. He should be hunted down and executed. Oh, he will be. Vaelor's voice was ice. But not before we address the people who commissioned the crime. Torvald's eyebrow rose. You believe his confession? A man who admits to poisoning your mate might say anything to deflect blame. He named you specifically, Chancellor. You, Heron, and Vex. All still sitting on this council. All still pretending to serve the Empire while actively working to undermine it. Councillor Heron stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. This is absurd. We would never... Sit down! The alpha command in those 2 words was absolute. Heron sat like his legs had been cut out from under him. Vaelor stood slowly, placed both hands on the table, leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me the truth. All of it. Who knew, who helped, who looked the other way. And then you're going to face consequences that will make Mira's exile look like a vacation. Torvald's expression hardened. And if we refuse? If we claim innocence? Then I'll assume you're guilty and act accordingly. You're basing this on the word of a confessed traitor. I'm basing this on 15 years of fighting beside a man who never lied to me. Not once. Not even when the truth was inconvenient. Kael is a lot of things, but a liar isn't one of them. The Chancellor's jaw worked. If you purge the council every time someone makes an accusation, you'll have no advisors left. Then I'll build new ones. From people who understand that serving the Empire means serving all of it, not just the parts that fit their vision of order. Vaelor straightened to his full height. Last chance, truth, or consequences. The thing about power is it operates on perception more than reality. You can have all the military might in the world, but if the people in the room believe they can survive your anger, they'll resist. They'll calculate odds, weigh options, decide if the cost of defiance is less than the cost of compliance. Vaelor needed them to understand there was no calculation. There was only inevitability. Torvald stared at him for a long moment, some unspoken assessment happening behind those old, sharp eyes. Then he sighed. It's true. All of it. The room erupted. Shocked gasps. Denials from Heron and Vex. Chaos. Vaelor let it happen for exactly 10 seconds. Then he slammed his fist on the table, and the sound cracked like a gunshot. Silence. Torvald continued as if there'd been no interruption. We commissioned the poison 3 years ago from an alchemist in the southern provinces. Kael administered it as instructed. The goal was never to kill her outright. That would have created a martyr. The goal was to make her leave, to make you choose the throne over her. And when she left, you convinced me to let her go. We convinced you it was necessary. That pursuing her would show weakness. That the Empire needed a king uncomplicated by personal attachments. Torvald's expression was almost regretful. We were wrong. I see that now. Watching what you've built this past year, the changes you've implemented, the way the empire has grown stronger precisely because you stopped trying to separate the personal from the political. We miscalculated badly, but you did it anyway. Vaelor's voice was quiet, dangerous. You destroyed the woman I loved because you were afraid of what influence she had over me. We were afraid of what would happen if the king's judgment was compromised by emotion. History is full of rulers brought down by their attachments. History is also full of rulers brought down by advisors who thought they knew better. Ceres spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You experimented on me, treated me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be helped. And then you tried to have me killed when your solution didn't work cleanly enough. Torvald met her eyes. Yes, the simple admission was somehow worse than a defense would have been. Why? Ceres leaned forward. Why not just kill me outright? Why make me suffer? Because the king needed to believe it was natural, needed to believe he'd made the choice himself. If we'd simply assassinated you, he would have torn the empire apart hunting for answers. But if you deteriorated naturally, if you chose to leave, then his grief would be clean, uncomplicated. The chancellor's voice carried the weight of genuine belief. We thought we were saving him from himself. This is where you see the true horror of conviction without empathy. These men genuinely believed they'd acted in everyone's best interest. They'd seen a problem, an Omega influencing policy through her bond with the king, and solved it with the tools available. Clinical, efficient, monstrous. And they'd probably sleep fine at night because intention mattered more to them than impact. Vaelor felt rage building in his chest, the kind that made his vision tint red, the kind that demanded violence and blood and screaming, but he forced it down, forced himself to think, because rage would feel good, rage would be satisfying, but rage wouldn't fix anything. He needed to be smarter than his anger. Heron and Vex, you're both under arrest. You'll be held until trial. Vaelor's voice was mechanically calm. The charges are conspiracy, assault on a royal mate, and treason. The penalty, if convicted, will be death. Both men paled but didn't protest. Guards moved in from the doorway, taking them into custody. Vaelor turned to Torvald. You? I'm not arresting. The chancellor's eyebrows rose. Why not? Because you're going to do something for me first. Something that might earn you exile instead of execution. Name it. You're going to find the alchemist who created that poison, and you're going to bring me everything they know about reversing it. Torvald's expression shifted. Surprise, then understanding. My lord, Kael's letter said there was no antidote. Kael isn't an alchemist. Find the person who created it and make them try. I don't care if the odds are 1 in 1,000. I don't care if it takes years. You're going to spend however long you have left fixing what you broke. And if I fail, then you'll die knowing you tried. Which is more mercy than you showed Ceres. The old wolf absorbed that, nodded slowly. I'll leave immediately. Take whatever resources you need. Money, men, authority to commandeer expertise. But understand this. Vaelor leaned close, voice dropping to a whisper only Torvald could hear. If you run, if you disappear, if you do anything except devote every waking moment to this task, I will hunt you. And when I find you, your death will take days, understood? Perfectly, my lord. Good. Dismissed. Torvald stood, gave a formal bow that carried weight, and left without another word. The remaining council members sat in shocked silence. Vaelor looked around the table at the faces that remained. Some trustworthy, some question marks. All of them processing what had just happened. New rule. From this moment forward, this council operates on transparency. No secret meetings, no conspiracies, no decisions made in shadows that affect lives in the light. If you have concerns about policy, you bring them to me directly. One of the newer council members, a woman named Alara, who'd been appointed after the restructuring, spoke carefully. And if we disagree with your decisions, my lord, then you disagree, loudly, in front of everyone, and we debate it until we find a solution or I overrule you. But it happens in the open. He looked at each face. The old way nearly destroyed us. The new way might be messy and slow, but at least no one will be poisoning people to maintain order. Questions? Silence. Then we're done. Council dismissed. They filed out quickly, eager to escape the tension. Cerys remained in her chair, staring at the table. Vaelor sat down heavily beside her. You let him go. Let Torvald walk out of here. I gave him a purpose. Sometimes that's more effective than a cage. And if he runs, then I'll hunt him like I promised. She was quiet for a moment. You think he can actually find a cure? Honestly, I don't know. But I had to give him the chance. For you, for me, for the possibility that we can fix even a fraction of what they broke. Cerys looked at him, and her expression was complicated, anger mixing with something that might have been gratitude or might have been grief. What if there is no cure? What if this is permanent? Then we deal with it, like we have been, like we will continue to. Her hand found his across the table. I'm so tired, Vaelor. Tired of fighting. Tired of being broken. Tired of watching you sacrifice pieces of yourself trying to hold me together. You're not a burden. I am. I know it. You know it. The difference is you're too stubborn to admit it. She squeezed his hand. But I appreciate the stubbornness, even when it's exhausting. 3 days later, reports started coming in from the outer provinces. Omegas who'd gone into the wilderness, who'd been written off as lost causes, were returning. Drawn by rumors of sanctuary, by whispers that the capital had programs to help instead of hunt. They arrived in small groups, feral, broken, some barely human. Vaelor established temporary housing in the outer districts, brought in the healers and scholars who'd been studying Cerys's condition, started building infrastructure to handle what was quickly becoming a crisis he'd inadvertently created by showing mercy. The city wasn't ready. Resources stretched thin. Tensions rose between citizens who feared the feral Omegas and those who wanted to help. Violence erupted in the market district when one of the returning Omegas shifted and attacked a merchant who'd gotten too close. 3 people injured. Property destroyed. Fear spreading like wildfire. Vaelor stood in the wreckage of a fruit stand, looking at claw marks gouged deep into wood, and understood he'd created a problem he didn't have a solution for. Cerys found him there as sunset painted everything in shades of amber and blood. This is my fault. Her voice was quiet. I'm the one who inspired them to come back. I'm the example that gave them hope. This is our fault. Mine for showing there was an alternative. Yours for surviving when everyone thought you wouldn't. The city's for not being ready. He kicked at a broken crate. We need more than sanctuaries. We need answers. Real ones. Torvald hasn't sent word in 3 days. For all we know, he's halfway to the Eastern Kingdoms by now. So what do we do? Vaelor looked at the city he'd built, at the empire he'd bled for, at the woman beside him who represented everything that mattered and everything that might destroy them both. We adapt. We build faster. We find solutions even when they don't exist yet. And if we can't, then we burn. The words hung between them like prophecy. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. A group of feral Omegas, driven by instinct and hunger and fear, attacked a residential district. Not the outer slums where the returning Omegas were housed, but the inner city, where merchants and minor nobility lived. 6 dead, dozens injured, a neighborhood destroyed. The city erupted in riots. Citizens demanding the Omegas be expelled, others demanding protection. The military caught between orders to maintain peace and sympathy for people who were scared. Vaelor deployed guards to contain the violence, but it spread like plague, building to building, district to district. The careful balance he'd built over a year of reforms collapsing under the weight of fear. He stood in the throne room receiving report after report of destruction and felt control slipping through his fingers like water. Cerys appeared in the doorway, bloodied and exhausted. I stopped 3 of them, talked 2 others down from shifting, but there are too many, too spread out, too scared to listen. We need to lock down the city. Impose martial law until what? She cut him off. Until you imprison everyone who might be a threat? Until you prove the old council was right about me being a liability? That's not... It is. This is exactly what they predicted. That your attachment to me would compromise your ability to protect the Empire. That mercy toward the broken would invite chaos. She moved closer, and he saw the weight of guilt crushing her. They were right, Vaelor. Not about the method, but about the result. Your empire is burning because you chose me. No. My empire is burning because people are terrified of what they don't understand. Because the old systems didn't leave room for anything except execution or exile. Because we're trying to build something new and change is violent. He grabbed her shoulders. This isn't your fault. Then whose is it? Mine. For not moving faster, for not building the infrastructure before opening the gates, for thinking good intentions would be enough. The throne room doors burst open. Kael stood there, travel-worn and exhausted, flanked by 2 guards with weapons drawn. Vaelor's hand went to his sword. Give me one reason not to kill you where you stand. Kael raised his hand slowly. Because I brought you something better than my death. He gestured, and a cloaked figure stepped forward from behind the guards. Old, weathered, carrying a leather satchel that looked like it had seen decades of use. This is Morgan, the alchemist who created the poison. The old woman pulled back her hood, revealing a face lined with years and secrets. I've come to fix my mistake. Vaelor's world narrowed to this moment. This impossible, unlikely moment. Can you? Morgan's expression was grave. I can try, but I'll need time, resources, and access to your mate. The poison was designed to be irreversible, but nothing is truly permanent if you understand the mechanisms well enough. How long? Weeks. Maybe months. And no guarantees. Outside, the city continued to burn, the riot spreading, the careful balance collapsing. Vaelor looked at Cerys, at Kael, at the alchemist who might hold the key to everything or nothing, and he made a choice that would reshape what came next. Do it. Whatever you need, but understand this. He looked at Morgan with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. If you're lying, if this is another manipulation, I will make your death legendary. They'll tell stories about how the king executed an alchemist for centuries. I'm not lying. The old woman's voice was steady. I created a monster. I'm here to unmake it. Vaelor turned to the guards. Take her to the healing wing. Give her everything she asks for. Cerys, you'll work with her. Then he looked at Kael. You and I have unfinished business. I know, but first we save the city. Then we settle accounts. Kael nodded. Relief and dread mixing in equal measure. The guards escorted Morgan and Cerys out. The throne room emptied until only Vaelor and Kael remained. The 2 men who'd built an empire together. The 2 men whose trust had shattered completely. Vaelor drew his sword. Kael didn't move. If I'm going to kill you, I need to understand why. Not the reasons in the letter, the real reason. Kael met his eyes. Fear. I was afraid you were becoming someone I didn't recognize. Someone who might choose mercy over strength. Someone who might dismantle everything we'd built because an Omega whispered softer alternatives. And now? Now I understand that strength and mercy aren't opposites. That the empire you're building is better than the one I tried to preserve. That I destroyed something irreplaceable because I couldn't see past my own limitations. Kael's voice cracked. I'm sorry, Vaelor. For all of it. For the poison. For the lies. For making you choose between the throne and your mate when you should have never had to choose at all. Sorry doesn't fix anything. I know. Vaelor's sword didn't waver. The city is burning. I need every capable fighter to help contain the riots. So here's what happens next. You fight beside me like you always have. You help save what we built. And when it's over, when the dust settles and the dead are counted, you stand trial. And if the trial ends in execution, then I'll do it myself, quick and clean. The mercy you denied, Cerys. Kael absorbed that, nodded. Fair enough. Vaelor sheathed his sword. Let's save the Empire. Then we'll settle what's between us. They walked out of the throne room side by side, toward a city tearing itself apart, toward riots that demanded blood and order in equal measure, toward a reckoning that had been building since the moment Kael first poured poison into tea and called it duty. The Empire was burning, but from ashes, something new could be built. If they survived long enough to see it. The city burned in 3 districts by the time Vaelor and Kael reached the outer walls. Smoke rose in black columns against the night sky, thick enough to choke on, carrying the stench of burning wood and fear. Screams echoed through narrow streets, some human, some not, all desperate. The careful order Vaelor had built over years was unraveling in hours, pulled apart by terror and instinct, and the fundamental truth that civilizations are only ever 3 missed meals away from chaos. Kael moved beside him with the ease of long practice, sword drawn, eyes scanning rooftops and alleyways for threats. Like nothing had changed, like betrayal hadn't carved a canyon between them that might never be crossed. Vaelor forced himself to focus. Personal grievances could wait. The Empire was bleeding. They reached the main square where his guards had formed a defensive line against a mob of citizens, demanding the feral Omegas be expelled immediately. On the other side, a smaller group of protesters shouted for protection and mercy. Between them, his soldiers looked uncertain, trapped between conflicting orders and their own fears. Captain Theron spotted Vaelor and pushed through the lines. "My lord, we can't hold this much longer. The violence is spreading faster than we can contain it. We need authorization to use lethal force." "Denied." Vaelor's voice cut through the noise. "These are our people, scared and angry, but still ours. With respect, my lord, some of them aren't people anymore. They're animals wearing human skin." Then we remind them what being human means. We don't slaughter them in the streets like the old regime would have. The old regime kept order. The old regime is why we're in this mess. Vaelor pushed past the captain toward the center of the square, Kael a half-step behind. He climbed onto a merchant's cart, elevating himself above the crowd. "Citizens of the capital!" His voice boomed across the square, carrying alpha command that made people stop mid-shout. "Hear me!" The crowd's attention shifted, hostile, desperate, waiting for answers he wasn't sure he had. "I know you're afraid. I know the violence has reached your homes. I know you've lost people you love. And I know the easiest solution seems to be removing the threat entirely." Heads nodded, angry murmurs of agreement. But here's what that solution costs. It costs us our humanity. It costs us the very thing that separates us from the savagery you're afraid of. These Omegas didn't choose to become what they are. They were made this way, poisoned, broken, driven mad by people who saw them as problems instead of lives. He gestured toward the outer districts where the returning Omegas were housed. Some of them were your neighbors once, your friends, your family members who disappeared and were written off as lost. They came back because they heard we'd changed, that this empire might finally offer help instead of execution. A woman in the crowd shouted back, voice cracking with grief, "My son is dead because one of them couldn't control their shift." "Don't tell me about mercy when I'm bearing children." Vaelor met her eyes, didn't flinch from the weight of her pain. "You're right. Mercy feels like surrender when you're drowning in loss. But executing them won't bring your son back. It'll just create more bodies, more grief, more mothers standing where you are, demanding blood for blood until there's nothing left but corpses." The thing about leadership in crisis is that logic rarely wins against emotion. People don't want nuanced explanations when they're terrified. They want simple solutions, clear enemies, decisive action that makes them feel safe even if it doesn't actually make them safer. Vaelor couldn't give them simple. He could only give them truth and hope it was enough. Here's what I'm offering. Increased patrols. Immediate relocation of high-risk individuals to secured facilities outside the city. Mandatory monitoring for all returning Omegas until they demonstrate control. And resources, real resources, dedicated to finding a cure. He paused, letting the words settle. "But I will not execute people for being sick. I will not repeat the mistakes that created this crisis in the first place. If that makes me weak in your eyes, so be it. But this is the line I won't cross." The crowd was silent for a long moment, processing, deciding. Then a man pushed forward from the front ranks, merchant class by his clothes, old enough to remember harder times. "And if they kill again, if your mercy costs more lives, then the responsibility falls on me. Not them, not you, me." The man studied Vaelor's face for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. "I'll trust you, my lord. For now. But if this goes wrong, if more people die because you chose compassion over safety, don't expect us to make the same mistake twice." Fair enough? The tension in the square shifted. Not resolved, not even close to peaceful, but no longer at the immediate breaking point. Vaelor stepped down from the cart as the crowd began to disperse. Theron approached with a grim expression. "That bought us time. Not much, but some. What's the actual plan? Contain the violence, relocate the most unstable Omegas to the old fortress in the northern hills, double guards on all residential districts, and pray that the alchemist can actually deliver something useful before this whole situation implodes completely. And if she can't, then we improvise. Like we always do. Kael spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. The northern fortress can hold maybe 50 people. We've got over 200 feral Omegas in the city now, with more arriving every day. The numbers don't work, then we make them work. Build more facilities, requisition the old military barracks, convert warehouses. I don't care how we do it, just that it gets done. Vaelor started walking toward the healing wing where Saris was working with Morrigan. Kael fell into step beside him, and the familiarity of it, years of moving together through crisis after crisis, felt like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. They reached the healing wing to find it transformed into something between a laboratory and a battlefield triage center. Saris sat on a bed while Morrigan drew blood, both women focused with intensity that shut out everything else. Saris looked up as they entered. Her eyes were still more gold than human, the wolf close to the surface after hours of helping contain other Omegas. How bad? 3 districts burning, 6 confirmed dead in the riots, dozens injured, the city's holding by a thread. She absorbed that without visible reaction. Morrigan's made progress. Maybe. She thinks the poison works by degrading neural pathways that regulate shift control. If she can identify the exact mechanism, she might be able to create a counteragent. How long? Days. Weeks. She doesn't know. Vaelor moved to Saris's side, took her hand. Her skin was fever hot, the wolf burning just beneath the surface. Can you hold on that long? I have to. Too many people counting on me being the proof this can be fixed. Her fingers tightened on his. But I'm so tired, Vaelor. Fighting every second not to lose myself. Watching others go through the same thing and knowing I can't help them because I'm barely holding myself together. Then rest. Let Morrigan work. Let me handle the Empire. You can't handle everything alone. That's how we got here in the first place. The door burst open. A guard breathing hard, wild-eyed. My lord, the Eastern Gate, they're breaching. Who? Everyone. Citizens demanding the Omegas be expelled. Feral Omegas trying to escape the city. It's complete chaos. Captain Theron is down. Multiple casualties. They need you now. Vaelor was moving before the guard finished speaking. Kael right behind him. They ran through corridors, downstairs, out into streets still thick with smoke and screaming. The Eastern Gate was pandemonium. The massive wooden doors had been breached from both sides. Citizens with improvised weapons, fighting guards, fighting feral Omegas, fighting each other in a knot of violence that had no clear sides anymore. Blood slicked the cobblestones. Bodies lay crumpled against walls. Captain Theron was indeed down, clutching a wound in his side while still barking orders to soldiers who couldn't hear him over the noise. Vaelor drew his sword and waded into the chaos. There's a point in battle where thought stops and instinct takes over, where your body moves before your mind processes threats, where muscle memory built from years of violence becomes the only thing keeping you alive. Vaelor had been in this place countless times, had learned to trust the part of himself that calculated angles and distances faster than consciousness could track. He fought with surgical precision, disarming citizens without killing them, subduing feral Omegas without permanent harm, creating space for his guards to reestablish order through sheer force of presence. Kael moved in perfect synchronization beside him, the way they'd fought through 100 battles, covering angles, anticipating movements, 2 parts of a single weapon, and that familiarity hurt worse than any blade. A massive Omega in full wolf form crashed through the melee, heading straight for a cluster of citizens too panicked to run. Vaelor intercepted, taking the hit with his shoulder, using the wolf's momentum to redirect it into a building wall. The impact rattled his bones, but he held on, pinning the wolf down with alpha dominance and raw strength. "Stand down!" the wolf snarled, thrashing, completely lost to instinct. Vaelor pressed harder, forcing obedience through the bond all alphas shared with wolves. Brutal. Overwhelming. The kind of dominance that broke minds if held too long. I said, stand down! The wolf's struggles weakened, then stopped, shifted back to human, A young man, maybe 20, covered in scars and barely conscious. Vaelor hauled him upright, shoved him toward guards. Get him to the holding cells, sedated and secured. He turned back to this battle just in time to see Kael take a blade meant for a civilian. The beta went down hard, blood pouring from his shoulder. Vaelor's vision went red. He moved through the remaining combatants like death incarnate. No more restraint, no more calculated mercy. Just overwhelming force applied with absolute precision. Within minutes, the fighting stopped. Not because order was restored, but because everyone still standing was too terrified to move. Vaelor stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, covered in blood, most of it not his, and felt the weight of failure crushing down. This was what his reforms had bought. This chaos, this violence, this complete breakdown of everything he'd tried to build. Kael pushed himself upright, hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. We need to seal the gate, establish a perimeter, get the wounded to healers. His voice was steady despite the pain. Professional. Like he hadn't just taken a blade for a stranger because that's what they did. That's who they were. Vaelor wanted to rage at him, wanted to demand why Kael still fought like a loyal soldier when loyalty had died with that first dose of poison. But there wasn't time for personal grievances when people were dying. Do it. Get Theron to the healers. Seal the gate. Double guards on all remaining entrances. And you? I'm going back to Morrigan. If she can't deliver results soon, none of this matters. The city will tear itself apart before we can rebuild it. He started walking back toward the healing wing, legs heavy with exhaustion, mind racing through options that all led nowhere good. Saris met him halfway, running through streets still echoing with violence. Her eyes were wild, fully gold now, barely human. I felt it, felt the fighting, felt you almost lose control. I'm fine, you're covered in blood, not mine. She grabbed his arms, and her grip was strong enough to hurt. This is because of me, all of it. If I'd never come back, if I'd stayed in the wilderness, then you'd be dead, and I'd be ruling an empire I hated. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? I'm the proof that broken things can't be fixed, that mercy is weakness, that your reforms were built on fantasy instead of reality. No. You're proof that the old way was wrong, that poison and execution and fear don't solve problems, they just hide them until they explode. He pulled her close despite the blood and smoke and chaos. We're not giving up. Not on you. Not on them. Not on the idea that we can build something better, even if it kills us? Especially if it kills us. Because at least we'll die trying instead of living with the alternative. Here's the thing about conviction when everything's falling apart. It's either the anchor that keeps you grounded, or the weight that drowns you. There's no middle ground. You either commit completely to the vision of what should be, or you compromise back toward what was. And compromise with the old ways meant accepting that some lives matter less than order. That some people are disposable when they become inconvenient. Vaelor had already made that choice once, had let Saris disappear because Empire demanded it. He wouldn't make it again, even if refusing cost him everything. They returned to the healing wing together to find Morrigan hunched over a workbench covered in vials and equipment, her hands moving with frantic precision. The old alchemist looked up, and her expression carried something Vaelor hadn't seen before. Hope. I think I have it. The mechanism. The way the poison degrades the neural pathways. Can you reverse it? Maybe. The damage is extensive, but if I can introduce a compound that stimulates regeneration while suppressing the degradation, there's a chance. A small one. How small? 10%. Maybe less. Those aren't good odds. They're better than zero. Morrigan held up a vial filled with silver liquid that caught the light like mercury. This is the prototype. Untested, potentially dangerous. Could kill her as easily as cure her. But it's all I have. Vaelor looked at Saris. Your choice. She didn't hesitate. Do it. Saris? I'm already dying, Vaelor. Slowly, losing pieces of myself every day. At least this way there's a chance I get them back. The alchemist prepared an injection with hands that had seen decades of practice. Loaded the silver liquid into a syringe with steady care. This will hurt. A lot. Your body will fight the compound because it reads like poison initially. You'll shift uncontrollably, possibly for hours. The pain will be... I don't care. Just do it. Morgan positioned the needle against Cerys's arm. Last chance to change your mind. Cerys looked at Vaelor. If this goes wrong, if I die or go completely feral, I need you to promise me something, anything. Don't let them use my failure as proof the old way was right. Don't let them twist this into justification for going back to execution in exile. He gripped her hand. I promise. Good. Then I'm ready. Morgan injected the compound. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Cerys screamed. Her body convulsed. Bones cracked and reformed in rapid succession. Skin rippled between human and fur so fast it blurred. Her eyes went from gold to human to something else entirely. White, pupilless, burning with light that didn't come from any natural source. Vaelor held her down as she thrashed, using every ounce of alpha strength to keep her from hurting herself. The shift was violent beyond anything he'd seen before, uncontrolled, catastrophic. Morgan, what's happening? The compound is fighting the poison. It's working, but the process is... Cerys's back arched. Blood poured from her nose, her ears, her eyes. Her screams took on a quality that wasn't remotely human. Kael appeared in the doorway, took one look at the situation, and moved to help pin her down. What do you need? Just hold her. Don't let her shift fully. They struggled against strength that shouldn't have been possible, against a body caught between states, fighting for existence against a cure that might kill as thoroughly as the disease. Minutes passed like hours. Then, slowly, the convulsions began to lessen. The shift slowed. Stopped. Cerys lay still, breathing in ragged gasps, covered in blood and sweat, eyes closed. Vaelor's hands shook as he brushed hair from her face. Cerys? No response. Cerys, please. Her eyes opened. Human. Fully human. Clear for the first time in years. Did it work? Her voice was hoarse but coherent. I don't know. I feel different, clearer, like fog lifting. Can you shift? I don't know. I'm afraid to try. Morgan moved closer, examining Cerys with clinical precision. The compound has stabilized. The neural pathways are regenerating, slowly but measurably. This is beyond what I hoped for. So she's cured? Not cured. Stabilized. The damage is too extensive for complete reversal. But if this holds, she'll have control again. Real control. Vaelor felt something in his chest loosen, something that had been clenched tight for years. How soon can you produce more? Enough for all of them? Weeks. The ingredients are rare. The process is complex. But yes, it's possible. Then start. Whatever resources you need, whatever help, just make it happen. A guard burst through the door, and Vaelor's moment of hope shattered against new crisis. My lord, the council chambers, there's been an attack! He was running before thought caught up. Kael and Cerys behind him, Morgan shouting something about staying put that went ignored. They reached the council chambers to find the doors blown off their hinges. Inside, smoke and debris. Bodies sprawled across the floor. And standing in the center of the wreckage, covered in blood that wasn't his, was Torvald. The old chancellor held a bloody sword in one hand. At his feet lay councillors Heron and Vex, throats cut, eyes staring at nothing. My lord, Torvald's voice was calm. I've cleaned house. Vaelor's sword was in his hand before conscious thought. What have you done? What you should have done immediately. Heron and Vex were planning another coup, planning to use the riots as cover to remove you and install a more traditional leadership. How convenient that the only witnesses are dead, not the only ones. Torvald gestured, and several council members emerged from behind overturned furniture. Alara among them, pale but unharmed. She spoke with a shaking voice. He's telling the truth, my lord. They confessed before he killed them, showed us evidence of their conspiracy. Letters. Plans. Connections to foreign powers who wanted the reforms reversed. Vaelor looked at the bodies, at Torvald's bloody hands, at the wreckage of a system he'd tried to rebuild. You executed them without trial, without my authorization. I executed traitors before they could execute you. There's a difference, not in my empire. then perhaps your empire needs to accept that some threats require immediate action, that sometimes the old ways exist for good reasons. This is where everything hinges, where the choice between ideals and survival becomes concrete instead of theoretical. Vaelor could arrest Torvald, put him on trial, prove that the new way held even under extreme pressure. Or he could accept that sometimes dirty work needs doing, and punishing the person who does it is cowardice dressed as principle. Neither option was clean. Neither option was right. Before Vaelor could speak, alarms began ringing throughout the castle. Not attack warnings. Something different. Something worse. A guard ran in, face white with terror. "My lord, the Omegas, all of them, they're shifting at once, every single one. It's like something triggered them simultaneously." Vaelor felt ice in his veins. Where? Everywhere. The holding cells, the temporary facilities, the ones still loose in the city. Hundreds of them, all shifting, all going feral at the exact same moment. He turned to Morgan. Could the compound cause this? Some kind of chain reaction? Impossible. One dose couldn't affect hundreds of... The old alchemist stopped. Her face went pale. Unless someone else used a trigger, something designed to activate latent instability in all poisoned Omegas simultaneously. Who would have access to that kind of weapon? Only one person. The one who created the original poison. Me. Morgan's hands shook. But I didn't. I swear I didn't. Which means someone else has my research, my formulas. Vaelor's mind raced through implications, connections, the shape of a conspiracy far larger than he'd imagined. Kael had approached the old council about removing Ceres. They'd commissioned the poison from Morgan, but who'd given them the idea? Who'd known an alchemist existed with the capability to create something that specific? Who'd been orchestrating this from the beginning? The answer hit him like a physical blow. The doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and through them walked a figure Vaelor recognized but had never considered a threat. His own brother, Dristan Draven. Younger by 3 years. Sent to the eastern provinces a decade ago to govern territories too far to matter, too distant to be a threat. Except he'd never stopped being a threat. Dristan smiled, and it was Vaelor's smile twisted into something cruel. "Hello, brother. I think it's time we discuss the future of our empire." Behind him, soldiers poured into the chamber. Not city guards, not Vaelor's men, eastern forces, loyal to Dristan. And the city beyond the windows erupted in screams as hundreds of feral Omegas went completely, catastrophically mad all at once. Vaelor's empire, his reforms, his vision of something better, all of it collapsing in real time. And standing in the center of the chaos was family. Because betrayal never came from strangers. It came from the people who knew exactly where to cut deepest. Vaelor stared at his brother across a room filled with corpses and shattered ideals, and felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place with sickening clarity. Dristan Draven stood like a mirror image, twisted by ambition and resentment. Same height, same build, same eyes that had watched their father's empire crumble and drawn completely different conclusions about what came next. Where Vaelor had chosen to rebuild with mercy, Dristan had clearly chosen to rebuild with fire. The younger Draven gestured at the chaos visible through the windows. Hundreds of feral Omegas tearing through streets, citizens fleeing in terror, the careful balance Vaelor had built collapsing in real time. Impressive, isn't it? All those broken creatures losing control simultaneously. Morgan's poison was brilliant, but her trigger compound? That was my addition. A failsafe to activate if anyone ever got close to a cure. Vaelor's hand tightened on his sword. "You did this. All of it. Not just the trigger. Everything." Dristan smiled, and there was genuine pleasure in it. "Not everything. I can't take credit for your sentimentality. That was all you. But yes, I orchestrated the broader strokes. Approached the old council about your mate being a liability. Connected them with Morgan. Made sure Kael was positioned perfectly to administer the poison. And when you somehow survived that mistake, when you actually brought her back and started building something new, I simply waited for the perfect moment to burn it all down." Why? Because you were ruining everything Father built, turning an empire of strength into a sanctuary for weakness, making us soft, making us vulnerable. Dristan stepped forward, his soldiers moving with him in coordinated precision. I spent 10 years in the eastern provinces watching you reform and restructure and compromise, watching you choose compassion over dominance. And I watched our enemies take notes, watched them see weakness where Father would have shown only strength. We're stronger than we've ever been. You're deluded. Strength isn't measured in infrastructure and social programs. It's measured in fear, in enemies who won't attack because they know the cost, in subjects who obey because disobedience means death. That's not strength. That's tyranny. It's survival. And you forgot the difference. The thing about family betrayal is it cuts deeper than any other kind because it comes wrapped in shared history. Every childhood memory becomes evidence of long-term deception. Every moment of supposed loyalty recontextualizes as manipulation. You don't just lose the person, you lose the past you thought you shared. Vaelor had built his rule on trusting the right people, had prided himself on reading loyalty and competence, and his own blood had been working against him for years while he'd been too focused on external threats to see the knife aimed at his back. Cerys moved to Vaelor's side, her presence grounding despite everything falling apart. So what's your play here, Drystan? Kill your brother, seize the throne, return to the old ways? Close. Kill my brother, blame his death on the feral Omega crisis he created through misguided reforms, seize the throne to restore order, and yes, return to methods that actually work. Dristan's eyes shifted to Cerys with something like pity. You'll be the symbol, of course, the broken Omega who drove the king mad, who destroyed an empire through weakness masquerading as love. They'll write tragic songs about you. Vaelor stepped forward, placing himself between Cerys and his brother. You'll have to go through me first. I'm counting on it. Your death needs to look heroic. The king who died trying to stop the monsters he created. Very poetic. Kael shifted position, blade ready, still bleeding from his earlier wound but standing firm. Torvald moved to flank them, old and bloody but steady. Around them, the handful of loyal council members drew what weapons they had. Against 24 Eastern soldiers trained for precisely this moment. The math didn't work, but mathematics had never stopped Vaelor before. Here's what most people don't understand about impossible situations. They're only impossible if you accept the parameters as given. If you fight on the enemy's terms, with the enemy's rules, using strategies they've already accounted for. But if you're willing to break every convention, abandon every tactical principle, and bet everything on a single move that logic says can't work, sometimes impossible becomes merely improbable. And Vaelor had built an empire on improbable victories. He looked at Cerys. Can you shift? Controlled. I don't know. Haven't tried since the compound. Could go either way. If it goes wrong, then we die together. Better than the alternative. She nodded, understanding passing between them without words. Vaelor turned to Kael. The Eastern Gate. How many guards loyal to us? Maybe 20, if they're still alive. Get to them. Rally anyone you can find. I need you to open the gate and let the feral Omegas out of the city. My lord, that's insane. They'll slaughter anyone in their path. Exactly. And right now, anyone in their path is Dristan's soldiers. Use chaos against chaos. Kael's eyes widened. Then a grim smile crossed his face. You beautiful bastard. He was gone before Drystan could react, moving with speed that belied his injuries. Dristan's expression shifted from confident to concerned. Stop him! Half the soldiers broke off in pursuit. The odds improved marginally from hopeless to merely catastrophic. Vaelor raised his sword. Last chance, brother. Stand down. Leave the city. I'll give you exile instead of execution. Dristan laughed. You're still trying to show mercy? Even now? You really haven't learned anything. I've learned plenty. Learned that mercy takes more strength than cruelty. Learned that building is harder than destroying. Learned that the easy answer is usually the wrong one. He took a combat stance, muscle memory from 1,000 battles. But I've also learned when mercy runs out. And brother, you just crossed that line. They moved simultaneously. The fight that followed was brutal and personal in ways battlefield combat never was. This wasn't strategy or tactics. This was 15 years of resentment and philosophy and completely incompatible visions of what power meant, all distilled into steel and blood and desperate violence. Dristan fought like their father had taught them, efficient, ruthless, without hesitation or remorse. Every strike aimed to kill, every movement calculated for maximum damage. Vaelor fought differently. Fought like someone who'd learned that survival wasn't the only goal. He blocked attacks meant for Cerys, positioned himself to protect the remaining council members, fought not just to win, but to preserve what little remained worth preserving. And that difference mattered. Cerys shifted beside him, and for a heart-stopping moment, Vaelor thought the compound had failed, thought she'd go feral and add to the chaos instead of containing it. But the shift was controlled, deliberate. Her wolf form emerged smoothly, powerfully, with intelligence burning in gold eyes that stayed focused and aware. She hit the nearest soldier like a freight train, taking him down without killing, disarming without destroying, fighting with precision that proved Morrigan's cure had worked better than anyone dared hope. Torvald and the Loyalists engaged the remaining soldiers with desperate courage. The council chambers became a close-quarters battlefield, blood-slicking floors already stained with earlier violence. Vaelor pressed his brother back, matching him strike for strike, and saw fear creep into Dristan's eyes for the first time. "You're not supposed to be this good anymore. You've gone soft. You chose sentiment over strength." Vaelor disarmed him with a move their father had taught them both, sending Dristan's sword clattering across stone. Sentiment doesn't make you weak. It makes you fight harder. Because you're not fighting for power. You're fighting for people you'd die to protect. He pressed his blade to Dristan's throat. "Yield, never. Then you're a fool." Outside, the sound of the eastern gate opening echoed through the city, followed immediately by screams as feral Omegas poured into streets where Dristan's soldiers were concentrated. The chaos Dristan had created turned on his own forces with devastating efficiency. Strategic brilliance wrapped in absolute desperation. Dristan's eyes went wide as he realized his carefully laid plans were collapsing. "You'd unleash monsters on your own city? They're not monsters. They're victims. And you made them weapons. I'm just redirecting the aim." Vaelor increased pressure on the blade. "Call off your soldiers. Order them to stand down. End this now, and you get exile. Keep fighting, and you die here. You won't kill me. You're too soft for fratricide. Try me." The words were cold, absolute, carrying weight of a man who'd crossed every line he'd sworn never to cross and discovered he could live with the consequences. Dristan searched his brother's eyes, looking for the man who'd chosen mercy over execution, compassion over conquest, reform over revenge. Found someone different staring back. Found someone who'd learned that sometimes the cost of building something better included burning down everything that threatened it. He yielded. "Stand down!" Dristan's voice cracked. "All forces, stand down!" The fighting stopped raggedly, soldiers lowering weapons with expressions ranging from relief to confusion. Vaelor stepped back but kept his sword ready. "Torvald, take him into custody. Maximum security. No visitors. No communication with the outside." The old chancellor moved to comply, binding Dristan's hands with efficiency that spoke to decades of experience with prisoners. Dristan met Vaelor's eyes one last time. "This isn't over. The Empire will tear itself apart without strong leadership. Your compassion will be its grave. Maybe. Or maybe we'll build something that survives precisely because it's worth fighting for instead of just afraid to die." Vaelor turned away from his brother, dismissing him as thoroughly as one could dismiss family. Cerys shifted back to human, standing naked and bloodied but steady. Someone handed her a cloak. She wrapped it around herself without taking her eyes off Vaelor. "You actually did it," turned his own weapon against him. "We did it. Couldn't have held them without you. The compound worked. I shifted and came back. Fully. Completely." The implications hit them both simultaneously. If it worked for her, it could work for others. The cure wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. Morrigan approached, looking shaken but determined. "I need to get back to the lab. Need to start mass production immediately. The feral Omegas outside, if we can cure even a fraction of them. Do it. Whatever you need." The old alchemist hurried away, purpose overriding exhaustion. Kale returned through a side entrance, limping badly but alive. His clothes were shredded. Blood poured from multiple wounds. Eastern Gate is chaos. Feral Omegas are engaging Drystan's forces throughout the city. Our guards are trying to establish safe zones for civilians. It's working, but barely. Casualties? High. On all sides. But the tide's turning. Drystan's soldiers are retreating. They weren't prepared for this level of chaos. Because they trained for conventional warfare, not for fighting victims weaponized by their own creation. Vaelor moved to the windows overlooking the city, watched smoke rise from a dozen districts, watched his empire bleed, and made the hardest choice of all. He turned to address the remaining council members, the loyal guards, anyone who could hear. The crisis isn't over. Won't be over for days, maybe weeks. But here's what happens next. We open the healing facilities to everyone. Feral Omegas, injured citizens, enemy soldiers who surrender. No exceptions, no revenge killings, no executing prisoners because they're inconvenient. My lord, one of the guards started. No! Vaelor's voice cut through objections before they formed. This is the line. We either commit fully to being better than what came before, or we admit Drystan was right, and power only understands fear. He looked at each face. I know you're tired. I know you've lost people. I know the easy answer is to purge the threats and rebuild on foundations of strength. But easy answers are how we got here. How the old council justified poisoning an innocent woman. How my brother rationalized destroying thousands of lives. We're doing this differently, even if it kills us. Especially if it kills us. Because the empire is only worth saving if it's worth living in. The thing about leadership in impossible moments is that logic doesn't persuade. Statistics don't inspire. People follow conviction. They follow someone who believes so completely in a vision that they're willing to burn for it. And Vaelor had burned through everything else, trust, family, certainty about who he was, to arrive at this singular truth. Compassion wasn't weakness. It was the only strength that mattered. Alara spoke up from where she'd been treating wounded. The people will follow you, my lord. Not because they're afraid, because they believe. They've seen you choose the hard right over the easy wrong too many times to doubt you now. Other council members nodded agreement. Vaelor felt something in his chest loosen, something that had been clenched tight since the moment he'd read Kael's confession. Not forgiveness? Not yet. Maybe not ever. But hope that they could build something from the ashes anyway. Well, the next 72 hours blurred into controlled chaos. Morgan worked without sleep, producing doses of the cure with help from every alchemist and healer they could conscript. The compound wasn't perfect, failure rate hovered around 30%, and side effects ranged from mild to catastrophic, but it worked often enough to matter. Feral Omegas began responding to treatment, some immediately, others gradually. A few not at all. The ones who recovered told stories of years in the wilderness, of forgetting their names, their families, everything except the need to survive, of becoming the monsters everyone feared while some part of them screamed helplessly from inside a prison of instinct. Each story was a knife to Vaelor's chest, each recovery a small victory that didn't erase the losses. The city slowly stabilized. Drystan's forces surrendered or fled. Citizens emerged from hiding to find their king walking wounded streets, helping clear rubble, sitting with families who'd lost everything, not giving speeches, not making promises, just present, just human. Kael worked beside him through it all, the unspoken tension between them a constant weight. They didn't discuss the betrayal, didn't address the trial that waited once the immediate crisis passed, just moved through each task like soldiers who'd fought together so long they could operate without words. On the fourth day, Saris found Vaelor in the ruins of the Eastern Market, helping merchants rebuild stalls that had been destroyed in the riots. You need to sleep. You've been awake for 90 hours. I'll sleep when the city's safe. The city will never be completely safe. That's not how cities work. She sat beside him on a broken crate, shoulder pressing against his. How many did we lose? Final count? 347 dead. Over 1,000 injured. Entire districts destroyed. And those are just the immediate casualties. Long-term trauma, economic damage, trust that'll take years to rebuild. Stop! She put her hand over his. You can't carry all of it. I'm the king. If I don't carry it, who does? We all do. Together. That's the whole point of what you built. They sat in silence as the city moved around them, rebuilding, healing, surviving. Finally, Vaelor spoke. I keep thinking about what Dristan said, about strength and fear and whether mercy is sustainable. Part of me wonders if he was right. He wasn't. How do you know? Because I'm sitting here, cured, stable, proof that the hard way works even when logic says it shouldn't. She turned to face him fully. You could have executed me when I was feral, could have let the council's assassins finish what they started, could have chosen empire over me at any point in this entire nightmare. But you didn't. And because you didn't, hundreds of Omegas are getting treatment instead of arrows. Citizens are rebuilding instead of fleeing. The empire is surviving not despite your compassion, but because of it. What if it's not enough? What if the next crisis breaks us completely? Then we break. But at least we'll break trying to be something better instead of just more of the same. Vaelor pulled her close, and she let him, and they sat in the ruins of what was and the fragile hope of what might be. Oops. Kael's trial happened 6 weeks later in a packed grand hall. The charges were read with clinical precision: conspiracy, assault on a royal mate, administering poison with intent to cause permanent harm, each one carrying potential death penalty. The evidence was overwhelming. Kael didn't contest any of it. When asked to speak in his own defense, he stood before the assembled court and spoke with the same directness he'd brought to 15 years of service. I did everything I'm accused of, administered the poison, watched Ceres deteriorate, convinced the king to let her go when she disappeared, and I did it believing I was protecting the empire from a ruler compromised by personal attachment. The crowd murmured, hostile, demanding blood. I was wrong. About everything. The king's attachment to his mate didn't weaken him. It gave him perspective I lacked, made him see that empires built on fear and dominance eventually collapse under their own weight. That real strength comes from protecting the vulnerable, not purging them. Kael met Vaelor's eyes. I don't ask for forgiveness. Don't deserve it. But I ask that my execution serve a purpose. Let it be the last one. Let my death be proof that the new way is committed to justice, not revenge. That even the king's closest advisor faces consequences when he betrays trust. The hall went silent. Vaelor stood from the throne, descended the steps, stopped directly in front of Kael. You're right. You don't deserve forgiveness. What you did was unforgivable. You poisoned an innocent woman, destroyed years of her life, created a crisis that killed hundreds. Kael didn't flinch, just waited for the sentence. But execution would be easy. For both of us. You'd die a martyr to your own guilt, and I'd be free of the reminder that I trusted the wrong person. Vaelor's voice dropped. So here's your sentence instead. Life in service. Not to me, to them. He gestured toward the wing of the castle converted into treatment facilities. You'll spend every remaining day of your life helping care for the Omegas you helped destroy. Cleaning, feeding, treating, listening to their stories of what the poison cost them. And you'll do it knowing you caused their suffering and that no amount of service will ever balance that scale. The crowd erupted, some approving, others demanding harsher punishment. Kael's face showed something between relief and horror. My lord, accepted or refused? Choose now. A long pause. Then, accepted. Good. Guards, take him to the facilities. He starts immediately. As Kael was led away, Ceres appeared at Vaelor's side. That was cruel. Yes, but necessary. Yes. Think it'll work? Making him face what he did every single day? I don't know. But execution would have been mercy. And he doesn't get mercy. He gets consequences. Here's what nobody tells you about justice. It's never clean, never satisfying. The punishment never truly fits the crime because some crimes are too big to balance. You either kill the guilty and call it even, or you make them live with what they've done and hope rehabilitation means something. Vaelor had chosen the harder path. Again, always, because that's what leadership required when you'd sworn to be better than what came before. 3 months after Dristan's failed coup, the Empire looked different in ways that went deeper than architecture. The feral Omega crisis had stabilized. 60% responded to treatment. Of those, most regained enough control to rejoin society with varying levels of support. The rest remained in care facilities, not prisons, but genuine sanctuaries with programs aimed at quality of life instead of just containment. The ones who didn't survive treatment were buried with honor instead of unmarked graves, their names recorded, their stories preserved, because they mattered, even in death, especially in death. The city rebuilt slowly. Some districts never fully recovered. Some citizens never forgave the king for choosing compassion over immediate safety. There were protests. There was resistance. There were voices calling for a return to the old ways. But the voices grew quieter each day. Because you can't argue with results when the results are people standing in front of you, whole again, proving the impossible was just difficult. Vaelor sat in the gardens with Ceres on a morning when spring was trying to convince the world winter had ended. She'd been working with Morrigan on refining the cure, improving success rates, reducing side effects. How's the latest batch? 82% success rate. Side effects minimal in most cases. We're getting better at this. Good. The eastern provinces sent word they're seeing similar symptoms in their omega populations. Drystan's poison spread further than we thought. So we send them the cure, and the knowledge to produce it, and healers to train their people. It'll cost a fortune. Then we spend a fortune. Better than the alternative. She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and they watched birds rebuild nests in trees that had nearly burned. Do you ever regret it, choosing this path? Every single day. She looked up at him surprised. But I'd regret the alternative more. This is hard, this is messy, this is exhausting in ways war never was. But it's real, and real is worth the cost. He kissed her forehead. Besides, I've got you back. Stable, whole. That alone makes everything worth it. I'm not whole. Still have episodes, still shift without meaning to sometimes, still lose time when stress gets overwhelming. But you come back. That's the difference. You fight your way back instead of staying lost. Because you taught me fighting was worth it. No, you taught me. I just finally listened. They sat in comfortable silence until duty called them back to the 1,000 small tasks that kept an empire functioning. 6 months after the crisis, Torvald returned. The old chancellor looked like he'd aged a decade in half a year. Weathered, exhausted, but carrying himself with purpose. He knelt before Vaelor in the throne room. My lord, I've returned with findings. Stand, report. Torvald stood, produced a stack of documents. The alchemist who created the original poison, Morrigan, was working from research stolen from Eastern scholars decades ago. The poison itself is a weaponized version of a naturally occurring compound found in deep forest fungi. The scholars were studying it as a potential treatment for other conditions. Someone weaponized medicine? Someone saw potential for control and acted on it. The trail leads back further than I expected. This wasn't just about your mate. It was a systematic program to develop weapons against omega populations across multiple kingdoms. Dristan was part of it, but not the architect. He learned about the program during his time in the East, saw an opportunity to use it against you, and adapted it for his purposes. So there are others. Other kingdoms with the same capability. Yes. And now that we have developed a cure, they'll want it. Or they'll want to destroy it to maintain their advantage. Vaelor absorbed this. The crisis wasn't over. Might never be over. Just evolving into new shapes. Then we share the cure freely. Make it public knowledge. Remove the strategic advantage by making it worthless. My lord, that's the right thing to do. I know it costs us leverage. I know it makes us vulnerable. But keeping knowledge locked away is how we got here in the first place. He stood from the throne. Send word to every kingdom we have relations with. Offer the cure. Offer the knowledge to produce it. Offer training for their healers. And make it clear that any attempt to weaponize omega populations again will be considered an act of war. Torvald nodded slowly. You've changed, my lord. I've learned. There's a difference. Indeed. The old chancellor's expression carried something like pride. For what it's worth, I believe you're building something that will outlast us all. Not because it's strong, but because it's good. Let's hope you're right. After Torvald left, Ceres emerged from behind a pillar where she'd been listening. You know this means we'll have enemies. Kingdoms who see our compassion as weakness to exploit. Let them come. We'll deal with threats as they arise, but we're not changing course out of fear of what might happen. She moved into his arms. You've become the man I always believed you could be. I've become the man you made me want to be. Big difference. They stood together in the throne room, two people who'd survived impossible odds and come out changed but unbroken, and Vaelor felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the absence of conflict, that would never exist in a position of power, but the certainty that he was doing the right thing for the right reasons, and whatever came next, he could face it without compromising the values that made him who he was. Walk. A year after Cerys had been found in the wilderness, after the coup, after the cure, after everything, Vaelor stood on the balcony where it had all started. The city spread below him, scarred but healing. The empire beyond remained imperfect, fractious, constantly threatening to fall apart. But it was theirs, built on foundations of compassion instead of fear, strength instead of dominance, hope instead of inevitability. Cerys joined him, her hand finding his. What are you thinking about? How far we've come? How far we still have to go? Whether any of this will survive past our lifetimes? It will. How can you be sure? Because we're not building it alone anymore. Every Omega we cure becomes an advocate. Every citizen who sees mercy work becomes a believer. Every kingdom that adopts our methods becomes part of something bigger. She squeezed his hand. Empires built on fear die when the fear fades. But empires built on hope? Those last because people choose them. Every single day they wake up and choose to keep building instead of tearing down. Vaelor pulled her close. I love you. For saving me when I was too stubborn to save myself. For showing me that strength and compassion aren't enemies. For fighting your way back from hell because you believed there was something worth fighting for. I love you too. For coming after me. For rebuilding an empire around the idea that broken things can heal. For choosing the hard right over the easy wrong every single time it mattered. They stood together as night fell over their empire, and somewhere in the healing facilities, former feral Omegas learned to be human again. Somewhere in the council chambers, advisors debated policy with transparency instead of secret plots. Somewhere in the city streets, citizens rebuilt lives with the knowledge that their king valued compassion over conquest. And in a secured cell, Vaelor Draven sat alone with his certainty that strength only came through dominance, watching through barred windows as his brother's vision proved him wrong with every passing day. This is what victory looks like when you refuse to compromise your values. Not clean, not simple, not free of cost or consequence or lingering damage, but real, honest, worth the blood it took to achieve. Vaelor Draven had started as an alpha king who ruled through fear and power and absolute dominance, had lost the woman he loved because he chose empire over her, had watched that choice nearly destroy everything he'd built. And he'd rebuilt it all on the radical idea that mercy wasn't weakness, that the cost of power should never be your humanity, that empires were only worth ruling if the people in them were worth protecting. Some called him weak. Some called him dangerous. Some called him the greatest king their generation had ever seen. He didn't care about any of it. Because every night, when the empire slept and the throne sat empty and the weight of leadership pressed down like gravity, he sat beside a woman who'd once been lost and was now found, still fractured but fighting, still broken but whole enough to choose him every single day. And that choice mattered more than any crown ever could, not because it was easy, but because it was real. And real was the only thing worth dying for, the only thing worth living for, the only thing that lasted when everything else burned away. Vaelor looked at Cerys in the starlight, saw her smile despite everything they'd survived, and knew with absolute certainty that he'd make the same choices again. Every single one, even the mistakes, especially the mistakes. Because those mistakes had taught him the only lesson that mattered. Power means nothing if you can't use it to protect what you love. Dominance is empty if it can't make space for weakness. And empires are only worth ruling if the cost doesn't destroy the man holding the crown. He'd paid that cost once. He'd rebuilt from ashes, and he'd do it again if necessary. But this time, he wouldn't face it alone. This time, he had her. And that made all the difference.